sentence sits before you, simple yet endless in its implications. A declaration, a paradox, a loop. It says this statement is false, a paradox that refuses to settle, a riddle that confounds. It sounds almost innocent at first, but try to grasp it, and you feel the ground beneath you shift. If it is true, then it must be false. But if it's false, then it must be true. You find yourself suspended, caught between two truths, neither of which can stand on their own. There's no escape from it, no place to stand where certainty still exists. In this space, where truth and falsehood bleed into one another, logic falls apart. The liar paradox doesn't just invite you to question a statement, it invites you to question the very idea of truth itself. What does it mean for something to be true? And can anything truly be false? This isn't the first time we've encountered something that defies the neat categories we've built. But this one is different. This paradox twists logic into a pretzel, and no amount of reasoning can untangle it. The more you pull at the strands, the more elusive it becomes. And as you think about it, it starts to spread. A single sentence, so simple, but it expands. It infects every statement that follows. What if every truth is like this? What if we've been blind to the contradictions underneath every certainty we hold? You try to move past it. You remind yourself that the rules of logic are built to hold. You tell yourself that contradictions are only temporary gaps, that every puzzle has a solution. But the liar paradox won't let you go that easily. It sits there, at the heart of reason, waiting for you to wrestle with it. It's been around for centuries. The philosopher Eubulides first presented it, and still the paradox remains. It's simple, but the deeper you look, the more it pulls you into its web, and the harder it becomes to see the world the same way again. Once you encounter it, everything seems just a little off. You start questioning statements, wondering, can this really be true, or is it just another paradox waiting to break open? A layer of uncertainty settles over everything. What you thought you knew now feels fragile. The liar paradox doesn't offer answers, it simply presents a question that refuses to be answered. How can something be both true and false? How can a statement defy its own nature so effortlessly? And as you try to reason your way out of it, you realize it's not meant to be solved. It is a flaw in the logic itself, a glimpse into the cracks beneath our tidy systems. If this one statement can exist without resolution, what does that say about all the other truths we hold? How many assumptions have we made, without realizing the paradox is lurking underneath? The paradox feels like a trap, but there's a kind of beauty in it. It exposes the fragility of certainty. The more you try to fix it, the more you see that there are truths we may never fully understand. The paradox doesn't demand an answer, it invites you to sit with the mystery, to acknowledge that not everything fits neatly together. Think of all the other moments in life, when certainty slips away, when what you knew turns out to be more complex than you thought. Maybe there's a freedom in that. The liar paradox shows us that sometimes there's nothing wrong with being stuck in a loop, circling endlessly without finding a clean resolution. And yet, even as you feel the paradox stretch out before you, you can't help but wonder, if we can't solve this, what else have we missed? What other truths, lurking just beneath the surface, are waiting to unravel? What happens when our understanding of the world is built on such fragile ground? There's a quiet elegance in this paradox. It doesn't shout, it simply exists, steady and unyielding. It forces us to reconsider the foundations of logic, to question whether the systems we've built are as solid as we think. After all, if truth can't hold itself together, what are we left with? Perhaps the liar paradox is not a flaw, but a reminder that logic, no matter how clean or perfect it seems, is not immune to contradictions, and maybe that's where its power lies. In the cracks, in the unresolved questions that linger, we find a deeper kind of truth. But then as you linger in that space, the paradox starts to fade. Its edges blur, you see the world through a different lens, one where certainty isn't a given, but a fragile thing that may shift at any moment. The paradox never really leaves, it just becomes part of the landscape. And there in that quiet unfolding, the loop continues. It never ends. It doesn't need to. There's a man standing in front of a store, looking at a car that he believes is his. It's the same make, model, and color as the car he parked earlier. He sees the keys on the table, and without a second thought, he walks in and drives away. But here's the catch: that car doesn't belong to him. It's a perfect match for his, but it's not his. The real owner simply left the keys on the table by chance. And yet to the man, everything aligns perfectly. He believes the car is his, and he's right, but only by accident. This scenario, crafted by philosopher Edmund Gettier, reveals a strange flaw in our understanding of truth. We've always been told that knowledge requires belief, truth, and justification. But Gettier showed us that even when all these elements are present, we might still not know something. It's as if you found the key to a locked door, only to realize it opens a different lock than you intended. The key fits, but it wasn't the one you were supposed to use. Your belief in the key's power was justified, but the truth was never really yours to begin with. The Gettier problem doesn't just ask if something is true. It asks, can we truly know it, even if all the pieces seem to fit together perfectly? What does it mean for something to be justified as true, if by sheer luck we're led to an outcome that isn't quite what we thought it was? The man in the story has all the right reasons to believe that he's driving his own car. He's justified in his belief, and the car is indeed real. But his belief was based on faulty reasoning. He never truly knew the truth, even though it worked out in his favor. It's a cruel twist. This shakes up our understanding of knowledge. It reveals that belief and truth can exist side by side without forming true knowledge. What we thought was a sturdy foundation for understanding reality suddenly feels shaky. If belief can lead us astray, can we ever be truly sure of what we know? We're often told that if something is true, and we believe it, we know it, but Gettier shows that this simple formula is far from enough. Justification is crucial, yes, but it's not always a guarantee that what we believe is true. Sometimes truth is just an accident, something we stumble into without truly grasping its nature. And this isn't just an academic puzzle. It's a question about how we live our lives, how we make decisions, how we interact with the world. If our beliefs can align with truth by accident, what else are we taking for granted? What else might we believe to be true, only to find it's just a lucky coincidence? The Gettier problem quietly dismantles our confidence in our understanding of knowledge. It makes us realize that things can feel true, even when they're not. We can be justified in our beliefs, and still the truth may slip through our fingers. Knowledge, it turns out, is more elusive than we thought. The consequences of this realization are profound. If certainty is never truly attainable, if truth can slip past us, what does that mean for the way we live? For how we understand the world? How do we reconcile the gap between what we think is true and what is actually true? As you reflect on the Gettier problem, you might find yourself thinking about all the times you've been so sure of something, only to discover you were mistaken. It's a humbling experience, a reminder that even the most well-constructed beliefs can fall apart when faced with the true nature of reality. We begin to see that knowledge isn't a neat, tidy package. It's a messy, ever-shifting process. It's not just about believing something to be true. It's about understanding the complexity of truth itself and realizing that our beliefs may never fully capture it. This uncertainty opens up new paths of inquiry. It forces us to reconsider how we build our understanding of the world and what we rely on to form those beliefs. Maybe knowledge isn't just about having the right information, but about recognizing when we don't know as much as we think we do. And in that space, between what we know and what we can know, lies the Gettier problem, a quiet reminder that truth isn't always what it seems, and knowledge is always in the process of becoming, never fully arrived. It's a journey that never quite reaches its destination, always unfolding, always uncertain. In a world where so much rests on our understanding of truth, the Gettier problem invites us to stay humble, to remain open, knowing that even our most justified beliefs can be just a step away from something far more elusive. Knowledge in this light becomes a fluid living thing. It shifts and changes, like the horizon just out of reach. As we continue along this path, we may find that our search for truth is not just about finding answers, but about questioning what we think we already know. And in that questioning, the real journey begins, forever unfolding, never quite finished, like a puzzle with pieces that never quite fit. A sentence can be true or false, but can it describe its own truthfulness? This is the question that Tarski's Undefinability theorem asks, a quiet paradox that shatters the very idea of truth. It tells us that truth cannot be fully captured within the systems we create to understand it. Imagine trying to define truth using a language built on its own principles. You'd expect the language to describe truth perfectly, to lay out the rules of truth like an artist painting a portrait. But Tarski shows us that this attempt is doomed from the start. The very act of defining truth means stepping outside of it. Truth, it turns out, can never be fully expressed by any system that tries to define it from within. It's as if the painter cannot step into their own painting. The canvas remains beyond their reach. The concept of truth in all its beauty cannot be trapped by the language that we use to talk about it. This is the heart of Tarski's Undefinability theorem. It proves that any system of logic or language that attempts to define its own truth will fail to do so. It's not just a simple oversight, it's an inherent limitation. Truth cannot be contained within the boundaries of its own description. It's like trying to catch the wind with your hands. You may feel it, you may see it move, but you cannot hold it. You cannot grasp the essence of truth using the very tools designed to understand it. And yet truth exists. We feel it in our bones, see it reflected in our world. But words fall short. Tarski's theorem reminds us that no system can hold the key to its own door. The search for truth always takes us somewhere beyond the system itself. This paradox invites us to question how much we can really know and how deeply our understanding can reach when we rely on tools that can never fully capture the essence of truth. The theorem doesn't dismiss truth, rather it deepens our appreciation of it. It teaches us that truth is something that can only be glimpsed from a distance, never completely contained. We can see glimpses of it in the language we use, but the whole picture remains elusive, just out of reach. This might sound frustrating, but there's a quiet freedom in it. Tarski's Undefinability theorem allows us to step back from the constant pursuit of a perfect definition. It reminds us that some truths are too vast, too expansive, to be bound by any single description. We are not meant to define truth fully. We are meant to experience it, to live within its presence, and yet, as we step back, we also step forward. We know truth exists, even if we cannot fully express it. It is a force that moves us, guides us, shapes our understanding. We may never capture it completely, but we know it when we see it, feel it, experience it in our lives. Tarski's theorem echoes in the questions we ask about the world. It stirs in us the realization that in the search for understanding, we often find more questions than answers. Each answer leads to a new layer of truth, and with it more mysteries to explore. Truth in this sense is not an endpoint, but a journey, a path that continually unfolds. As we navigate this journey, we must let go of the expectation that we will fully define truth. Instead, we embrace the unfolding mystery, the quiet dance between what we know and what we will never fully understand. Tarski's theorem does not trap us in confusion. It invites us to explore the limits of our knowledge. The more we acknowledge the ungraspable nature of truth, the more we see it in our lives. It's in the way we feel certain about things, and yet remain open to the unexpected. It's in the beauty of our mistakes, and the wisdom that comes from questioning what we think we know. The limitations of language don't diminish the importance of truth. They simply remind us of its grandeur. Truth is vast, elusive, and ever-present, just outside the borders of our understanding. It's not something we can pin down, but something we must continuously reach for, knowing that we will always be a little bit short. So what does this mean for us? It means that we are not meant to define everything, nor can we. We are meant to understand that truth is always just beyond the horizon, waiting to be experienced, reflected upon, and explored. In this, Tarski's undefinability theorem doesn't limit us, it liberates us. As we move forward, we may find ourselves less concerned with the need for a perfect definition of truth. Instead, we learn to embrace the mystery, to understand that our journey with truth is an ongoing one. There is no end, no final understanding, just an ever-deepening exploration of the world around us. And as we explore, the boundaries of language and logic fade away, revealing that perhaps the greatest truth is not in the answers we find, but in the questions we continue to ask. A teacher stands before a class and delivers a strange announcement. Next week there will be a surprise exam. The students, caught off guard, begin to wonder when it will happen. The catch, however, is that it must remain a surprise. No one can predict the day, but how is that possible? They begin to think, if it hasn't happened by Thursday, it must be Friday, one says. But then another student points out that if they haven't had the exam by Thursday, it must be Friday, which makes it predictable, and thus, it can't be a surprise. The students begin eliminating days one by one, convinced that the exam cannot happen at all. After all, they've already figured it out. There's no way the exam could surprise them. But then when Wednesday rolls around, the unexpected happens. The teacher walks in, and the exam begins, completely surprising them. This is the surprise examination paradox. It's a riddle that plays with our expectations and tests the limits of our understanding. Logic says one thing, but reality behaves differently. The paradox challenges our assumptions about certainty and surprise and forces us to question how we predict the future. The paradox doesn't stop there. It seems simple at first, but it reveals a deeper truth. The student's certainty, believing that the exam cannot happen, was the very thing that made the exam possible. Their attempt to control the outcome, to predict it, is what set them up for surprise. How is this possible? They had all the information. The exam would happen next week, but it would be a surprise. Their reasoning was impeccable, yet they were still caught off guard. This paradox shows us that certainty and surprise can exist together in ways we never imagined. It forces us to look at the limits of logic. Can we trust our ability to predict the future, or is it possible that the very act of trying to predict the future makes it more likely that we will be wrong? The surprise examination paradox twists our expectations, making us realize that certainty may be a fragile thing. If we can predict everything, are we blind to the very thing we thought was impossible? If we expect to know the future, are we setting ourselves up for its unpredictability? This paradox isn't just about exams or teachers, it's a reflection of life itself. Every time we believe we've figured something out, we open ourselves up to the possibility that we're wrong. Every time we think we know what will happen, we might be missing something crucial. The surprise examination paradox forces us to reconsider how much we can really know. This paradox challenges the reliability of our assumptions. It asks, can certainty coexist with the unexpected? Can we be sure of anything when the very act of being sure might make us vulnerable to surprise? We may think we know, but the world has a way of throwing us curveballs. At its heart, the surprise examination paradox is about the unpredictability of life. We can prepare, we can plan, and we can reason. But in the end, we are never fully in control. Reality doesn't always follow our expectations, no matter how carefully we set them. Think about the moments in life when you were certain of something, only to be surprised by the unexpected. It's in those moments that the paradox reveals its truth. Our ability to predict is limited, and sometimes, the more we try to predict, the less we can actually control. This paradox doesn't just apply to exams or school. It's a principle that stretches across all of life. Whether it's waiting for a letter, expecting a phone call, or planning an event, we try to anticipate the future. But what happens when we're wrong? What happens when the future surprises us? The surprise examination paradox teaches us something profound, that our understanding of certainty is fragile. We cannot control everything, no matter how much we try to predict. The future will always have its surprises, and in those surprises, we learn that even our most logical assumptions are just guesses. This paradox doesn't just invite us to question our assumptions, it also invites us to relax into the uncertainty of life. Instead of trying to figure everything out, perhaps we can embrace the mystery. The future will unfold as it will, and our attempts to predict it are not as reliable as we'd like to believe. And as we move through life, we begin to see that the real surprises aren't the ones that shake us, but the ones that remind us of how little we can truly know. Life, like the exam, may surprise us when we least expect it. But that's what makes the journey so interesting. The surprise examination paradox leaves us with a quiet realization. The more we try to control the future, the less we understand it. And in that uncertainty, there's room for something else to unfold, something unexpected, something beyond the limits of our reasoning. The paradox is always with us, like a shadow just beyond our grasp. It teaches us that certainty isn't something we can hold on to forever. Instead, we learn to walk alongside surprise, to live with the uncertainty that shapes our world, and to embrace the mystery of what comes next. You hear someone say the word gavagai as they point to a rabbit in the field. You don't understand their language, but you know they're referring to the animal. But is gavagai really just rabbit, or does it mean something else? Could it mean rabbit, or could it mean part of a rabbit, or even hopping motion? This is the problem that Quine's Indeterminacy of translation brings to light. When we encounter a foreign language, we think we can easily assign words to things we understand. But what if there's no single perfect translation? What if the meanings of words shift depending on the context? The truth becomes murkier with every new translation. Think about how we translate words into different languages. For example, the word love means something different in every culture, even though we all think we understand it. If something as simple as love is flexible and shaped by culture, then how much more complex is it to translate concepts across completely different languages or societies? In Quine's view, there's no guarantee that the word gavagai means what we think it means. Our understanding of a foreign language is shaped by our experiences and assumptions. When we encounter a new language, we might interpret a word based on what seems obvious to us, but we can never be sure we're getting the full picture. It's not just that we can't always translate words perfectly, it's that we can't even be certain that the very concept behind a word matches up across languages. Does a dog in one language mean the same thing as a dog in another, or does it carry entirely different associations that we can't even see? The indeterminacy of translation reveals something deeper about truth. It suggests that truth may not be something that exists neatly and universally. Rather, it may be shaped by language, culture, and context, and those who try to pin it down might never fully succeed. Language isn't a simple mirror of the world, it's more like a fogged window. We can see through it, but the view is never perfectly clear. Words are not just labels for things, they carry a rich set of meanings and assumptions that shift over time and place. This brings us to a humbling realization. If translation is always imprecise, then how much of our own understanding of the world is shaped by the language we speak? Can we ever be certain that our words capture the full truth of what we experience, or are we always interpreting it through a lens we don't fully control? Take a moment to think about the things you know. How often do you rely on words to explain them? The language you use might not be the perfect key to the door of truth. It might be a rough sketch, something that only gives you a vague outline of reality, rather than the full, unfiltered picture. This is the challenge Quine presents us with. If translation is indeterminate, then perhaps our understanding of the world is too. If we can never perfectly translate words, what does that say about the possibility of understanding the world with precision? Is it even possible to grasp the truth fully, or are we always working with approximations? The indeterminacy of translation doesn't just apply to foreign languages, it touches the very heart of how we understand each other. If every word is shaped by our perspective, how do we know that we are truly communicating? Are we ever truly sharing the same meaning, or are we just exchanging interpretations? In this light, Quine's argument forces us to reconsider the very foundations of knowledge. If we can't fully understand another language, how can we be sure that we understand the world around us? The truth, in this sense, seems to escape us, slipping through our fingers like sand, no matter how hard we try to grasp it. This doesn't mean we should give up on trying to understand, but it does mean we should remain open to the idea that our understanding might always be partial. Language, after all, is just one lens through which we try to make sense of the world, but it's a lens shaped by our experiences, our culture, and our assumptions. Every time we think we've understood something fully, we're reminded by Quine's theory that our language might only give us a piece of the truth. Words may be powerful, but they are not all-powerful. They can point us toward understanding, but they may never deliver us to the complete truth. So, as we explore the world of language and meaning, we must be willing to let go of the idea that we can fully translate everything into something we understand. There may always be something just out of reach, something that words can only hint at, but never capture completely. And perhaps that's the beauty of Quine's idea, that in accepting the indeterminacy of translation, we open ourselves to the richness of experience. We begin to see that truth isn't something to be locked down or fully defined. It's something we live within, something we experience from different angles, never quite able to capture it in its entirety. The search for truth, then, becomes a process of exploring these gaps, these indeterminate spaces where meaning flows and shifts. And as we continue this journey, we realize that language is not the final answer to truth. It is just one way to approach it, always incomplete, always unfolding, always just out of reach. There's a man stuck in a muddy swamp, trying desperately to pull himself out. He tries grabbing onto nearby branches, but they break under his weight. In his struggle, he realizes something strange. The harder he pulls himself up, the deeper he sinks. His very attempts to escape are the things keeping him trapped. This is the Münchhausen Trilemma. It's a puzzle that reveals the paradoxes at the heart of all our efforts to justify knowledge. We want to prove something true, but every path we take seems to circle back on itself, creating an endless loop that never fully breaks free. The trilemma is named after Baron Münchhausen, a fictional character who claimed to have pulled himself out of a swamp by his own hair. The idea behind the trilemma is simple. Whenever we try to justify something, we end up needing justification for that justification, and so on forever. There's no clear starting point. This leaves us in a strange position. We seek certainty, but every time we think we've found a solid foundation, it turns out to be built on more assumptions. Just like the man in the swamp, every step forward seems to drag us further into the muck, without a real way out. There are three possible ways out of this loop, but none of them offer a perfect solution. The first way is circular reasoning. We justify something by using the thing we're trying to justify in the first place. It's like saying, this is true because I say it's true. But this doesn't really explain anything. It just goes in circles. The second way is to justify our beliefs by relying on an infinite chain of reasons. Each reason requires another reason, and that requires yet another, but this too can never reach an end. If each link in the chain depends on the one before it, then we're left with an endless trail of justifications, stretching out beyond what we can ever fully grasp. The third possibility is foundationalism. This is the idea that there must be some basic beliefs, the foundational ones that don't need further justification. But where do these foundations come from? What makes them unshakable? Even these basic truths, when questioned, lead us back to the trilemma, creating yet another layer of uncertainty. So we're stuck. Each of these paths seems to offer some form of escape, but none can truly free us from the endless cycle of justification. The more we try to prove something true, the more we realize that every attempt to justify our beliefs brings us back to square one. This is where the Münchhausen Trilemma forces us to confront a deeper truth about knowledge, that certainty might be an illusion. We may never be able to fully justify anything without stepping into an endless loop. Our search for absolute truth becomes a journey that circles back, time and time again. What if this is just the way things are? What if in our pursuit of absolute justification, we've overlooked the possibility that some things simply cannot be proven in the way we think they can? Maybe the more we seek unshakable certainty, the more we become lost in our own reasoning. This paradox speaks to the limitations of our reasoning. It shows us that no matter how much we try to build a solid foundation of knowledge, there will always be cracks beneath the surface. The harder we try to find certainty, the more we realize it is always just beyond our reach. The Münchhausen Trilemma forces us to reconsider what it means to know something. If we can't prove anything without falling into a loop, then what do we do with our beliefs? Should we just abandon the search for ultimate truth, or is there another way to approach knowledge? Perhaps the trilemma teaches us to let go of the need for absolute certainty. Instead of searching for a perfect foundation, we might learn to accept that some things are true enough for the time being. Knowledge becomes more about the journey than the destination, more about finding meaning in the process than in any final proof. The paradox also challenges our sense of what is reasonable. When every reason leads to more reasons, we are left with the humbling realization that our search for truth may never arrive at a clean final answer. The truth may always remain slippery, always in the process of becoming, never fully pinned down. This leaves us in a curious space. We are not hopeless, but aware. Aware that truth, as we've imagined it, may not be something we can ever fully possess. Instead, it's something we live with, something we approach without ever quite capturing. It's a constant motion, a search without a clear end, and in that space of uncertainty, perhaps there is a kind of freedom. The Münchhausen Trilemma reminds us that certainty is not the only path to understanding. Sometimes, we must embrace the mystery, letting go of our need for perfect justification. In doing so, we open ourselves to a deeper, more fluid relationship with truth. So, as you reflect on the trilemma, consider this: what would it mean to stop trying to pull yourself out of the swamp? What would it be like to acknowledge the mud, the struggle, and still continue on your journey? The answers may never come in the way you expect, but the search itself can still lead you to new understanding. You stand before an old door, its surface smooth and weathered with time. There's a key in your hand, but the question lingers: how do you know it will unlock the door? You might have been told the key fits, but what if the truth of its fit is uncertain? Can you trust your knowledge, or must you first prove that the key is the right one? This is the problem of the Criterion, a deep puzzle that asks where we should begin when trying to know something. It's a question about how we know what we know. When we try to understand the world, we must first decide what standards or criteria we will use to judge what's true. But here's the catch: to decide on these criteria, we already need to know something about what's true. Without any criteria to guide us, how can we even begin to understand what's true? And yet, without first knowing what's true, how can we pick the right criteria to judge things? This circular challenge traps us. We are caught between two questions. First, what do we use as a standard for truth? Second, how can we trust that standard if we don't already know what truth is? It's like trying to measure the length of a line without knowing what a line is. We're faced with a dilemma. If we don't know what's true, we can't choose the right criteria. But if we don't have criteria, we can't know what's true. It's an endless loop that leads us back to where we started, uncertain of where to turn next. The problem of the Criterion forces us to confront a question we rarely think about: how do we know that we're using the right tools to know the world? If we don't know what the right tools are, how can we be sure we're seeing things clearly? This paradox raises doubts about the very foundation of our understanding. In everyday life, we move from one assumption to the next, trusting that what we know is true enough. But when we pause to think about it, we realize that everything we accept depends on some underlying criteria. If those criteria are wrong, then everything else we build on top of them could collapse. This doesn't just apply to simple facts or truths. It touches everything: the way we see the world, the way we understand people, and even the way we make decisions. If we can't know the right starting point, how can we make sure that our conclusions are accurate? Philosophers have wrestled with this problem for centuries. Some suggest we must rely on foundational beliefs, basic truths that don't need further justification. But if these beliefs are questionable, then what can we stand on? Others propose a more flexible approach, where we test and refine our criteria as we go along. But does this lead to real knowledge, or is it just a process of stumbling in the dark? Imagine trying to solve a puzzle, but you're unsure whether the pieces fit. Without a clear method to decide if the pieces are right, you end up doubting whether you've made any progress at all. The problem of the criterion is like this: without a way to measure truth, we can't be sure whether we're even making sense of the world. Some philosophers have proposed that we can resolve this problem by starting with simple, obvious truths, things we know without a doubt. But even these things, upon closer inspection, might be tied to criteria we can't fully justify. Are we truly certain about anything, or are we always building on something that may, in time, prove unreliable? The uncertainty grows. Each answer seems to lead to more questions. If our criteria are built on assumptions, can they be trusted? If we can't fully justify the tools we use to see the world, what does that say about the knowledge we think we've gained? In practical terms, this problem challenges us in our everyday lives. How often do we accept something as true without ever questioning the criteria behind it? How often do we move forward with decisions based on standards we haven't even examined? The problem of the criterion invites us to stop and reconsider everything we think we know. The trick here is not to find a perfect answer, but to accept that our search for truth is always a work in progress. Our criteria may never be perfectly clear, and our standards might always shift, but that doesn't mean we can't move forward. The process itself, questioning, testing, refining, is what matters. When we think about the problem of the criterion, it's easy to feel trapped by the uncertainty. But maybe the key is to embrace that uncertainty, to understand that our knowledge will never be flawless. Instead of searching for absolute certainty, we learn to navigate the gray areas, finding meaning in the process rather than the final answer. This problem also teaches us to be humble. Knowledge is not something that can be neatly captured or perfectly understood. It's a journey that's constantly evolving, always moving forward, but never fully arriving. The more we embrace that journey, the more we can see how much is still waiting to be discovered. So as you reflect on the problem of the criterion, consider how much of your understanding depends on assumptions you haven't fully questioned. What criteria do you rely on to judge the world? And are they truly as solid as you believe, or do they need a little more attention? The search for truth, it seems, will always keep us asking, always keep us wondering. You stand in front of a mirror, gazing at your reflection. You know the image is you, yet the reflection is not the thing itself. It's just a representation, a model of you. But what happens when the model, the reflection, could just as easily be something else? What is the truth of who you really are? This is the essence of Putnam's model-theoretic argument. It challenges our understanding of truth by showing that what we perceive as true could be nothing more than a model, a mere representation. Just like the mirror reflects a version of you, our knowledge of the world could be shaped by models that are not the world itself. Putnam's argument suggests that for any scientific theory or description of the world, there could be multiple models that fit the same set of facts. These models can describe the same reality, but in different ways, each one seeming equally valid. So how do we know which model is the true one? Or is there even a single true model to begin with? To illustrate this, think of two different maps of the same city. One map might be more detailed in some areas, while the other highlights a different set of features. Both are useful, both describe the city, but neither map captures the entire essence of the city. They each represent different models of the same reality. The deeper problem comes when we realize that we too are part of the model we are trying to understand. Our language, our thoughts, and our interpretations are models of the world. They are not the world itself. Yet we often treat these models as the final word on reality, even when there could be countless other models that fit just as well. Putnam's argument calls this assumption into question. It suggests that the idea of a single, unchanging truth, something that perfectly matches the world, is a myth. Every theory we build, every model we create, is shaped by our perspective, our language, and our assumptions. No model is neutral or free from interpretation. This realization brings us face to face with a difficult truth. If all knowledge is built on models, how can we ever be certain that we truly know the world as it is? Every model is limited, shaped by the lens through which we view it. No model can ever fully capture the depth of reality itself. And yet we continue to live as if our models are the truth. We take our theories about the world as final, unquestionable, even when they are nothing more than approximations. We act as if our knowledge is certain, even though it is only ever a representation of something far more complex and unknowable. What does this mean for the truth we seek? If our knowledge is always a model, always incomplete, then perhaps the very idea of truth needs to change. Truth may not be something we can fully pin down or define. Instead, it may be an ongoing process of revising, adjusting, and understanding the world from different angles. Putnam's model-theoretic argument invites us to let go of the notion that we can ever completely know the world. It forces us to accept that our models, no matter how accurate they seem, are always partial. They reflect reality, but they are not reality. They are maps, not the terrain itself. This doesn't mean we abandon our search for truth. Instead, it means we need to approach truth with more humility. We must recognize that the models we create are always limited, always shaped by the perspective we bring to them. And in this recognition, we might find a deeper understanding of what it means to know. We must learn to live with uncertainty, to accept that our understanding will always be partial. Each model we create may be a reflection of the world, but it is never the full picture. And that's okay. In fact, it's in the acceptance of this limitation that we can truly begin to see the world more clearly. Think of truth not as something to be grasped or pinned down, but as something to be explored, something that unfolds as we navigate our way through the models we create. Every model, no matter how flawed, brings us a little closer to understanding the vastness of reality, even as we remain aware that no model can ever encompass it fully. Putnam's argument challenges us to rethink our approach to knowledge. It reminds us that the world is more complex than any model can capture. And in this recognition, we find not despair but an invitation to keep questioning, to keep exploring, and to keep creating new ways to understand the reality around us. In the end, truth may not be a final destination but a journey, one that never truly ends. Every model, every theory, every understanding we create is a step along the way. And as we move forward, we learn to embrace the fact that the truth is always just beyond our reach, yet always worth pursuing. There's a man walking through a swamp, lost in thought. Suddenly, lightning strikes nearby, and in an instant the man is gone, his body disintegrated by the force. Yet moments later, in the exact same spot, a figure appears, looking exactly like the man who just vanished. It's a perfect replica, a copy. This is the premise of Davidson's Swampman, a thought experiment that asks us a simple yet profound question. Can something be truly the same as another if it only appears to be so without any shared history or continuity? Is it the same person, or just a very convincing imitation? The Swampman emerges fully formed, with all the memories, habits, and thoughts of the original man. It speaks, moves, and acts just like him. But here's the catch. The Swampman has no real past, no lived experiences. It's a replica created in an instant, with no continuity to its original self. So, is it truly the same person? Davidson's Swampman challenges our ideas of identity and truth. If a perfect copy of a person appears out of nowhere, how do we decide whether it is the same person or simply an imitation? What makes us who we are? Our body, our memories, or the continuity of our experiences over time? Consider how we define truth in our own lives. We often rely on continuity and history. We trust that the things we know are consistent and that our experiences shape the truth of who we are. But the Swampman, despite being a perfect replica, lacks that history, that continuity. Does that make it any less true? The Swampman raises questions about authenticity. Is it enough for something to look, feel, and behave like the original, for it to be considered the same, or is there something deeper that makes something truly real? In a world where copies can be made and appearances can be deceiving, how do we determine what is authentic? This also touches on the idea of memory. The Swampman has all the memories of the original man, but those memories are not rooted in real experiences. They are just impressions, stored without any real events to back them up. Is memory enough to define someone, or does the experience itself matter more? If the Swampman's memories are indistinguishable from the original man's, does that mean it holds the same truths as the original? Or is there something about the continuity of a person's life, the way their experiences accumulate and shape them, that makes them who they truly are? Davidson's thought experiment also challenges the very idea of identity. If the Swampman is identical in every way, except for its lack of a past, can it be said to have the same identity as the original person? Or does its lack of continuity create a fundamental difference, even if we cannot perceive it immediately? The problem is this: identity isn't just about how something appears, it's about the narrative that binds it together. The original man's life is a continuous thread, a series of experiences and moments that define him. The Swampman, despite being identical in every way, lacks that thread. It's as if it exists in a vacuum, without any past to support it. This raises the question of whether truth itself requires continuity. Does the truth of who we are come from the ongoing flow of our lives, or can it be captured in a snapshot? If identity is tied to continuity, then a perfect replica, without that continuity, might never truly hold the same truth. And what about us, in our everyday lives? How do we define who we are? Is it enough that we look like the person we think we are, or is our identity tied to the continuity of our experiences, our memories, and our choices? The Swampman makes us wonder whether identity is truly something we can define so easily. This paradox also extends to our broader understanding of reality. If we can create a perfect copy of something, does that copy hold the same truths as the original? Or is there something essential that cannot be replicated? If a replica of something can pass all the tests of authenticity, does that make it real? Davidson's Swampman asks us to question the very nature of truth. Is truth something that can be captured in a moment, or does it require a history, a background, and a continuity to make it real? The Swampman's existence, devoid of a past, forces us to confront the limits of our understanding. What if the truth of something isn't just about its appearance, but about the web of experiences, actions, and histories that define it? The Swampman's lack of these layers forces us to ask whether the things we take for granted, our memories, our past, are what make us truly who we are. The Swampman presents a challenge to our sense of self. It forces us to reconsider the relationship between the past, the present, and identity. If something can look like us, act like us, and think like us, but still lack the continuity of our lived experiences, does it still hold the same truth? This thought experiment is a reminder of how fragile our sense of identity can be. It shows us that truth may not always be as clear-cut as we think. The things we believe to be true about ourselves, our world, and others may be more complex than a simple snapshot of appearance or behavior. In the end, Davidson's Swampman leaves us with more questions than answers, but that is perhaps its greatest lesson. Truth is not always something we can easily define. It's something that unfolds over time, shaped by continuity, experiences, and the deeper connections that bind us to the world around us. Imagine you are on a distant planet, a mirror image of Earth. The sky is blue, the sun shines, and everything looks the same. But there's one difference: the liquid you drink is not water, although it looks, tastes, and feels exactly the same. It's called XYZ on twin Earth, but is it still water? This is the essence of the twin Earth thought experiment, a concept that explores how we understand the truth of what we know, even when things appear identical. What happens when two worlds, so similar to each other, contain things that seem the same, yet are fundamentally different? The people on twin Earth call their clear, tasteless liquid XYZ, but it's not H2O. It's made up of entirely different molecules, even though it performs the same functions in their bodies and seems indistinguishable from water to an outsider. So when they say XYZ, are they referring to the same thing we mean by water? This raises an important question about meaning and reference. How do we know that the words we use refer to the same things across different worlds? If the molecules in the liquid are different, are the meanings of the words water and XYZ different as well, even if the liquid is identical in every other way? On Earth, we know that water is made up of H2O molecules. We understand its chemical structure and its role in life. But on twin Earth, the people have never encountered H2O. Their XYZ serves the same functions and looks identical, yet they have no reason to believe it's the same as our water. They've never tested it. The twin Earth thought experiment suggests that meaning is not just about how things appear to us. It's shaped by the context in which we live, including the environment, the people around us, and the knowledge we possess. The meaning of water on Earth is tied to the molecular structure of H2O, something the people of twin Earth have no awareness of. So if the people on twin Earth are using the word XYZ, are they using it correctly? Do they mean the same thing we mean when we say water? Are their beliefs and understanding about their liquid the same as ours, even if the molecules are different? The truth of their meaning seems to be inextricably tied to their environment. This thought experiment forces us to ask, is meaning something fixed, something intrinsic to the objects we talk about, or is it shaped by our experiences and environment? The people of twin Earth who live in an identical world seem to be referring to something very different, even if they're using the same word. Consider how much of our language is tied to our experiences. The way we define things like water, or even more abstract concepts like love or justice, is influenced by the world around us. Our words don't just represent objects, they are a product of our interactions with those objects and our cultural context. But the idea that meaning is shaped by context doesn't make truth relative or entirely subjective. Even though the people on twin Earth and we refer to different substances with the same words, there's still an objective difference between the two liquids. XYZ isn't water in the strict scientific sense, but how do we define truth when language and meaning seem so fluid? Twin Earth shows us that meaning and truth are not purely about our internal perceptions. They are bound to the environment, the experiences, and the scientific knowledge we have. When we say water, we are referencing a specific chemical substance that we understand deeply, even though it may appear identical to the people of twin Earth. This brings us to a more profound question. If we lived on twin Earth, would we be able to know that XYZ was not water? Would we be able to see past the appearances and realize that the liquid we drink is fundamentally different? Or would we too be fooled by the resemblance, just as the people on twin Earth are fooled by the appearance of water? The twin Earth thought experiment also highlights the limits of our own knowledge. We often assume that words are a direct match to the things they refer to. But this experiment shows us that what we understand as truth can change depending on our surroundings, our experiences, and the knowledge we possess. It also asks us to consider how much of our understanding of the world depends on things we cannot directly perceive. On twin Earth, the people live their entire lives with XYZ, believing it's the same as water, unaware of the difference, yet they never question their beliefs. What else are we accepting as true without questioning the deeper realities beneath the surface? This leads us to consider how meaning is rooted, not just in language but in the broader context of knowledge. The people of twin Earth, with their different history and science, may never come to realize that XYZ is not water. Their truth, based on their context, is real for them. But their truth is not the same as ours. At the heart of this experiment is a powerful realization: truth may not be as straightforward as we once thought. Even if two worlds appear identical, the truths they hold may be shaped by the different frameworks through which they see the world. Our understanding of truth is deeply influenced by our experiences, knowledge, and context. The twin Earth experiment makes us confront the complexities of meaning and truth. It challenges us to see that truth is not merely a reflection of the world around us, but something shaped by our understanding of that world. The word water might have the same sound in both places, but the meaning it carries depends on the world in which it is used. This thought experiment doesn't just change how we think about language, it changes how we think about truth itself. If two people on different planets can use the same word but mean entirely different things, what does that say about the objectivity of truth? Is truth universal, or is it shaped by the context in which it's found? Imagine you're standing in a room, speaking to someone about the world outside. You say, "It's raining outside," but then you add, "I know it's not raining outside." These two statements are at odds with each other. How can you believe one and then claim the opposite? Yet, this contradiction doesn't seem to be a simple mistake. This is Moore's paradox, a puzzle that reveals a strange kind of dissonance in our thinking. It's not about the content of the statements themselves. After all, it could very well be raining outside, but about the way the statements relate to each other. How can someone simultaneously believe something and deny it in the same breath? The paradox comes from the fact that we typically think of our beliefs as being logically consistent. When we say something is true, we believe it is true, and there's a harmony between what we think and what we say. But Moore's paradox highlights that sometimes we can hold contradictory beliefs at the same time without realizing the absurdity. To fully grasp this, consider the difference between saying, "I believe it's raining outside," and "it's raining outside." In the first case, you're talking about your belief. In the second, you're stating the fact itself. The paradox comes when you say, "I know it's raining outside, but I know it's not raining outside." The contradiction is not just a slip of logic, it's a deeper inconsistency. Moore's paradox does more than expose simple contradictions in our beliefs. It asks us to reconsider how we understand knowledge and belief. Normally, if we say something is true, we expect our belief to align with that truth. But here, we're faced with a belief that doesn't align with what we claim to know. This paradox makes us uneasy. How can we possibly know something and simultaneously deny it? It's as though the structure of knowledge itself is shaking. It forces us to ask, if we hold contradictory beliefs, can we truly know anything? And if we can't know anything reliably, how do we ever claim truth? It's not about what's outside the window or whether the rain is real. What's really troubling is the mismatch between knowledge and belief. If knowing something doesn't prevent us from contradicting it, can we trust anything we know? What does it mean to know if our beliefs about what we know can be in conflict? To take this further, think about how we express knowledge. We often say things like, "I know the sun rises in the east." But Moore's paradox suggests that knowledge isn't simply about saying things. It's about the consistency between what we claim to know and the beliefs we hold. If we say something is true, our beliefs must reflect that truth. The paradox also challenges the way we express our beliefs. If we can believe something and then contradict ourselves by saying we know the opposite, what does it say about the way we hold and communicate knowledge? Does knowledge exist only in what we say, or is it shaped by our deeper, perhaps unspoken beliefs? What makes Moore's paradox so unsettling is that it's not just a logical mistake, it's a subtle breakdown in the way we view knowledge. The paradox forces us to confront a reality where our certainty isn't as certain as we think. Can we trust our beliefs when they contradict what we know to be true? This paradox isn't just a curiosity for philosophers, it's something that shows up in everyday life. How often do we say things that contradict what we believe? We might say we believe something is true, but our actions or other beliefs might tell a different story. Moore's paradox holds up a mirror to this inconsistency. What's strange is that Moore's paradox doesn't just suggest that we are wrong, it points out that we can be wrong in a way that's almost invisible. We might not notice the contradiction because it feels natural to hold both beliefs at once. This kind of paradox forces us to recognize that truth and belief are more fragile than we might like to think. The real power of Moore's paradox is in how it makes us question the very nature of knowledge. We usually think that knowledge is a simple matter. If we know something, it must be true. But Moore's paradox shows us that there might be more to knowledge than we realize. There's something deeply human about the way we hold contradictory beliefs without even noticing. In a way, Moore's paradox invites us to pause and rethink how we define truth. We like to think of truth as something clear and absolute, but what if it's something more complex? What if truth and belief are not as neatly aligned as we would like them to be? The paradox is a challenge to our own understanding of certainty. It suggests that certainty may not be as stable or straightforward as we imagine. If we can hold contradictory beliefs without realizing it, how can we ever be truly sure of anything? Perhaps our quest for certainty needs to allow room for the unexpected contradictions we all carry. As we confront Moore's paradox, we're reminded of how complex our relationship with truth really is. Knowledge is not simply a matter of declaring what we know. It's a delicate balance of beliefs, experiences, and sometimes contradictions. In that space, truth becomes something that we must constantly question and examine, even when it seems as if we have it all figured out. You sit across from another person, their eyes meeting yours. They smile, they speak, and you respond. You know you are having a conversation, but here's the thing. How do you know that the thoughts in their mind are anything like the thoughts in yours? How do you know their experience is the same as yours? This is the problem of other minds. It's a question that asks how we can ever truly know what another person is thinking or feeling. We assume others have minds like ours because we share similar behaviors and reactions. But can we really know their minds, or are we left only with our own perception? When you look at someone, you see their face, their gestures, hear their words. But that's just the surface. You can never directly access their thoughts, their inner world. You only have your own thoughts to compare to, and those are so deeply personal, so tied to you, that it's impossible to truly imagine what someone else's experience might be like. We spend much of our lives interacting with others, yet we can never fully step into their shoes. Even the best descriptions or explanations of their feelings are just approximations. We can guess, we can empathize, but how do we really know what it's like to be someone else? In our minds, we create stories about others. We observe their actions, interpret their words, and draw conclusions about their feelings and thoughts. But these stories are based on our limited perspective. We can't know for sure whether their inner world matches our understanding of them, or whether they even experience the world as we do. This problem is not just about doubt, it's about the nature of reality itself. If we can't know the minds of others, how can we be certain about anything beyond our own immediate experience? Our whole understanding of the world is built on our perception of other people, but what if that perception is flawed, incomplete, or entirely mistaken? You might think that if another person acts in certain ways, that proves they have thoughts and feelings. But that's still an assumption. Just because someone behaves in a particular way doesn't guarantee that they are thinking or feeling what we assume. They could be acting in ways we recognize, but the reasons behind those actions might be entirely different. And consider this, how do we know that other minds even exist at all? We assume that other people have thoughts and experiences because we do, but there is no direct evidence that proves they do. They may look like us, act like us, but what if in truth, we are alone in our minds surrounded by empty shells that merely mimic life? This is the heart of the problem of other minds. It forces us to acknowledge that all we know about others is filtered through our senses, our understanding, and our assumptions. We cannot truly know if someone else's experience of the world matches ours, or if they even experience the world in the same way we do. This doesn't mean we should dismiss the existence of other minds entirely. After all, we observe that people act in ways that seem to align with having thoughts and emotions. But the problem remains, we cannot know for certain what it's like to be them. We can only make educated guesses based on patterns of behavior and shared experiences. What does this say about truth? If truth is built on our interactions with others, but we can never fully access their inner worlds, then how can we be sure we truly understand the truth of their lives? Our knowledge of the world around us is always partial, shaped by our limited experience, even when we think we know someone well. The problem of other minds doesn't just raise questions about other people, it raises questions about the very nature of knowledge. If we cannot truly know the minds of others, then how can we be sure that anything beyond our own mind is real, or that what we perceive is anything more than an illusion or a guess? This problem doesn't have an easy answer. We may never fully know the thoughts of another person, but that doesn't mean we can't engage with the world around us. We rely on empathy, observation, and communication to bridge the gap, but we must always recognize that at its core, our understanding is shaped by our own perspective, and that is a limited one. In a way, this challenge invites us to explore the mysteries of our own mind. It asks us to think about what it means to have an inner life at all, and how much of our experience is shaped by our mind's unique private view of the world. The problem of other minds reminds us that we are not the only minds that exist, but we are the only ones we can truly know. This doesn't necessarily make us feel more isolated. Instead, it can deepen our sense of connection with others. We may never fully understand someone else's mind, but that doesn't stop us from trying. It doesn't prevent us from caring, or from making the effort to bridge the gap between our own experience and theirs. The problem of other minds reveals that truth is not always as solid and certain as we'd like it to be. We cannot always know what others are thinking or feeling, and that uncertainty is part of the fabric of human existence. Yet in this uncertainty, there is room for compassion, empathy, and a deeper understanding of what it means to be human. This problem forces us to confront the limits of knowledge. We may never fully understand the minds of others, but that doesn't mean we stop engaging with the world around us. In fact, it's this very mystery, the unknowability of others, that makes our interactions meaningful and our quest for understanding a never-ending journey. You're sitting in a small windowless room, surrounded by a pile of Chinese symbols. You don't speak Chinese, you don't understand the meaning of the symbols, but you have a book full of instructions. The book tells you exactly how to manipulate the symbols, how to respond to each one with another symbol. Outside the room, someone is passing notes through a slot in the door. They're asking questions in Chinese, expecting a response. From inside, you follow the instructions in the book, and you give the responses that seem right, even though you have no idea what the symbols mean. You're simply following the rules. This is the Chinese room argument, presented by philosopher John Searle. It's a thought experiment designed to question the nature of understanding, knowledge, and consciousness. The question it raises is simple. If a machine can produce responses that seem intelligent, does it really understand anything, or is it just following instructions? Imagine the person outside the room receiving your responses. To them, it seems like you understand Chinese. You're giving appropriate, meaningful answers to their questions. But inside the room, you have no understanding of the language. You are just following a set of rules, manipulating symbols without any comprehension. Searle's argument isn't about the machine being able to mimic intelligence. It's about whether it truly understands. The person inside the room can answer questions, but they don't understand Chinese in any meaningful sense. They are simply processing symbols based on instructions. So if a machine follows similar rules, does it really understand the language it's speaking? This thought experiment is a challenge to the idea that intelligence and understanding are purely about processing information. In the Chinese room, the person can appear intelligent from the outside, but they lack any real understanding. Their responses are correct, but they don't know anything. They are just following instructions without comprehension. Searle's point is that understanding is more than just the ability to produce the right responses. It requires more than manipulation of symbols. It requires a deeper conscious awareness of the meaning behind those symbols. Just because something can generate the correct output doesn't mean it truly understands the content. This idea raises questions about artificial intelligence. If a computer or machine can mimic human intelligence, like answering questions or solving problems, does that mean it actually understands what it's doing? Or is it just following complex algorithms and rules, with no true understanding of the tasks it's performing? The Chinese room argument suggests that understanding is not merely about behavior or output, it's about a conscious awareness of meaning. A machine might answer questions correctly, but if it lacks awareness of the meaning behind the symbols, can it truly be said to understand anything? Does a mind need more than just processing to know? This challenges the idea that human intelligence can be replicated purely by mechanical means. If humans have minds that understand and interpret meaning, then perhaps machines, no matter how advanced, will always be limited by their lack of genuine consciousness. They may simulate intelligence, but they will never truly understand it. Think about how we learn languages. We don't just memorize symbols and rules, we connect those symbols to meanings, feelings, and experiences. Understanding comes from making those connections, from grasping what the words represent in the world. In the Chinese room, the person inside the room never makes these connections. They never understand what the symbols represent. The Chinese room argument also raises the issue of what it means to truly know something. We often think of knowledge as the ability to provide accurate responses to questions or situations. But is knowledge just about giving the right answers, or is it about having a deeper awareness of what those answers mean? This question isn't just about machines, it's also about us. How do we know that we truly understand anything? Are we just processing information and following rules, or do we have a deeper awareness of the meaning behind what we do and say? The Chinese room forces us to ask whether we truly understand the world, or whether we are just following patterns and routines. For those who argue that machines could eventually achieve true understanding, the Chinese room provides a stark challenge. If simply following rules and providing the right answers isn't enough for true understanding, then what else is needed? Can machines ever reach that deeper conscious awareness that we associate with human understanding? Searle's thought experiment suggests that we may need more than just the ability to process information in a human-like way. We may need something like consciousness, an awareness that goes beyond mere computation. Without that awareness, no matter how complex a machine's behavior, it can never truly understand. The Chinese room also calls attention to the difference between behavior and consciousness. A machine can mimic intelligent behavior, just as the person inside the room mimics understanding, but behavior alone doesn't guarantee consciousness. Understanding, Searle argues, is not just about getting the right answers, it's about having an experience of the meaning behind those answers. This doesn't mean that machines can't perform tasks that seem intelligent. It means that intelligence, in the full sense of the word, requires more than just producing the right outputs. It requires a consciousness, a knowing, a feeling that machines, as we understand them, cannot have. They can simulate intelligence, but they cannot truly be intelligent. As we continue to develop more advanced machines and AI, the Chinese room argument serves as a reminder that true understanding might be something beyond what we can currently replicate. The paradox of the Chinese room challenges our assumptions about what it means to be intelligent, forcing us to reconsider what knowledge and understanding really are. You're sitting in a room, staring at a painting on the wall. The colors seem vibrant, the lines crisp, and the shapes clear. You feel confident that you know exactly what you're seeing, but then you stop for a moment. What if what you're experiencing isn't the painting at all, but a mental image of it? This is the essence of the veil of perception. It's the idea that everything we experience in the world, all the sights, sounds, and sensations, are filtered through our senses and our minds. What we perceive is not the world itself, but a version of it, a mental image created by our mind, separated from the actual reality. Imagine standing in front of a tree. You see its branches sway in the breeze, the leaves shimmering in the sunlight. But what are you really seeing? Is it the tree itself, or is it just the light hitting your eyes, processed by your brain, and turned into a picture inside your mind? The tree, as it truly exists, remains behind a veil, hidden from direct view. The veil of perception challenges the very way we think about knowledge and truth. We rely on our senses to understand the world, yet these senses are not perfect mirrors of reality. Instead, they create representations, images that are distorted and incomplete. The truth, as we experience it, is always mediated through this veil. This veil can be likened to a lens through which we view the world. Every perception is shaped by the limitations of our senses, by the way our brain processes information. What we experience is always filtered, always adjusted, never a direct representation of the world as it truly is. This raises the question, can we ever know what's really out there? The veil of perception is a reminder that our understanding of the world is always partial, always mediated. When we touch something, we only experience the sensation through our skin, not the object itself. When we hear a sound, it's the air vibrating against our ears, not the source of the sound itself. The world is hidden behind a barrier we cannot cross. We might assume that the world we see is the world as it is, but what if our senses are fooling us? What if everything we experience is just an interpretation, a guess based on limited data? The colors we see, the sounds we hear, are they really the same as the world would show us, if we could see it without our mental filters? This question goes deeper than just perception. It challenges the very idea of truth. If all we can ever know is a version of reality, how can we ever be certain about what's real? If we can't directly access the world itself, how can we be sure that what we know aligns with the truth of that world? Philosophers have long wondered about this. If our senses are unreliable, then is the truth always beyond our reach? Is there a deeper hidden reality that we can never truly know? Some philosophers argue that all we can know is our own experience, shaped by our senses. The world itself, they say, may always be beyond our grasp. But the veil of perception doesn't just leave us in uncertainty, it also opens up possibilities. Since everything we perceive is an interpretation of the world, we can learn to question our perceptions. We can learn to adjust our mental images, to refine our understanding of the world. The veil may obscure the truth, but it doesn't mean we can't make progress in understanding. In this way, the veil becomes something that both limits and frees us. It limits us because we can never fully grasp the world as it truly is. But it also frees us because it opens the door to exploration, to interpretation, and to deeper questioning. What we perceive might not be the final truth, but it's a starting point, a place to begin our journey toward understanding. Think of how a painter creates a work of art. The brushstrokes, the colors, the textures, they are all ways of interpreting the world. In the same way, our senses are tools for interpreting reality, but they are not the final representation. We are artists of perception, crafting mental images based on what we can sense, but always aware that the final picture may never be fully captured. This idea forces us to reconsider what knowledge really is. Knowledge, like the perception of a painting, is never a direct connection with reality. It's always a step removed, but that doesn't mean it isn't valuable. The images we create in our minds help us navigate the world, even if they are imperfect representations of the truth. The veil of perception also invites us to reconsider what it means to be real. If the world we see is always filtered through our senses, does that mean it isn't real? Or is reality, in some sense, shaped by how we perceive it? Our perceptions are all we have, but they still allow us to interact with and make sense of the world. This thought experiment shows us that truth isn't something we can just reach out and grab. It's something we experience, something we create within the confines of our senses. It may always be behind a veil, hidden from direct view, but that doesn't mean it isn't there. The truth is present in the images we create, in the way we interpret what we experience. And yet the veil of perception doesn't leave us trapped in a world of uncertainty. It shows us that while we may never see the world as it truly is, we can still find meaning and understanding in the perceptions we have. We can still live, act, and think, even if our access to the ultimate truth is always limited. The veil, in a sense, becomes a challenge. It reminds us that what we see is not always the whole picture, and that the world is more complex than our senses can reveal. But it also invites us to continue searching, to keep exploring, to keep refining our understanding, knowing that the world may always remain slightly hidden from view. And so the veil becomes both a barrier and a bridge. It stands between us and the world as it is, yet it also provides us with a way to explore, to interpret, and to know. Through this lens, truth is not a fixed destination but an ongoing journey, shaped by our perceptions, our questions, and our attempts to pierce the veil. You stand in front of a map, trying to understand the landscape it shows. The map has lines, symbols, and names, but none of them are the real hills, rivers, or roads. The names on the map, like Paris or London, seem clear, but do they really capture the essence of the cities they represent? This is the heart of Frege's sense and reference distinction. It's an idea that challenges how we understand language and meaning. When we use words like Paris, we don't just point to the city itself, we point to something abstract, the idea, the concept, the meaning that the word carries in our minds. Frege's divided our understanding of words into two parts, sense and reference. The reference of a word is the actual object or thing it points to in the world. In the case of Paris, the reference is the actual city, with its streets, buildings, and history. But the sense is something more subtle. It's the mental image or concept we associate with that word. Think about the word morning. The reference is simply the time of day when the sun rises, but the sense might be different for everyone. For some, it's the quiet moment before the day begins. For others, it's the rush of getting out of bed. The sense is shaped by our personal experiences and understanding. Frege's distinction helps us understand how we communicate. When we speak, we use words to point to the world. But those words carry more than just the object they refer to. They carry our own thoughts, experiences, and interpretations of that object. When I say dog, I'm not just pointing to a specific animal. I'm bringing to mind the concept of a dog. But what happens when two people use the same word like dog, but have different senses attached to it? One person might think of a playful puppy, while another thinks of a dog they once feared. The reference, the actual animal, may be the same, but the sense is different. The word's meaning becomes something richer, more complex. This brings us to an important idea, that meaning isn't just about what we see or what exists in the world. It's shaped by our internal thoughts, experiences, and perceptions. When we communicate, we don't just exchange information about the world. We exchange interpretations, concepts, and mental images of the world. Take the word star. To a scientist, a star might be a massive ball of gas burning in space. To a poet, it might be a symbol of hope or beauty. The reference remains the same, actual stars in the sky, but the sense, the meaning we attach to that word can vary greatly depending on who is speaking. This distinction between sense and reference helps explain how we understand and misunderstand each other. When two people use the same word like tree, they may be pointing to the same object in the world, but they might have very different ideas about what that tree represents. One might see it as a source of shelter, another as a symbol of nature's beauty. The sense and reference distinction also helps us understand ambiguity in language. Consider the word bank. The reference could be a financial institution or the edge of a river. The sense, the mental image or concept we have when we hear bank, depends on context. But the reference is what we point to when we use the word. This distinction goes beyond just words. It can help us think about how we understand the world. Our perceptions, shaped by our senses, are always filtered through the mental concepts we've built up over time. These concepts influence how we see things and how we interpret the world around us. It's not just that we see the world through a lens, it's that the lens itself is built from a lifetime of experiences, memories, and knowledge. When we encounter something new, we don't just observe it, we interpret it through the concepts we've already formed. This is why two people can look at the same object and see something completely different. Frege's distinction shows us that meaning is never as simple as pointing to an object. It's a process of connecting words to concepts, ideas, and experiences, and these connections aren't always fixed. They can shift, grow, and change depending on context and perspective. In fact, this idea reshapes how we think about knowledge itself. If our understanding of the world is always shaped by our senses and concepts, can we ever truly know the world as it is? Or are we always seeing it through our own mental lens, interpreting it based on our experiences and beliefs? This question leads to deeper considerations of truth. If truth is tied to reference, the objects in the world we point to, then can our understanding of truth be influenced by the sense we attach to those references? The distinction between sense and reference reveals that truth isn't always a direct connection with the world. It's shaped by the way we think about that world. At the same time, Frege's idea shows us that communication is a process of bridging the gap between our own minds. We use words not just as labels for things, but as ways of sharing our internal sense of the world. This means that when we communicate, we are not just sharing information, but sharing our mental pictures, our interpretations of the world. Frege's distinction challenges us to think more deeply about language and meaning. It encourages us to recognize that what we say isn't just about the world outside us. It's also about the mental worlds we build within ourselves. And those mental worlds shape the way we see and understand the truth of the world around us. In the end, Frege's sense and reference distinction shows us that meaning is both personal and shared. It's shaped by our experiences, but it also connects us to the world and to each other. Understanding this distinction invites us to look more closely at how we use language, how we interpret the world, and how we communicate truth. Imagine you're taught a simple rule, like adding 2 to any number. You start with 2, then add 2 to get 4, then 6, and so on. It feels clear, but what if someone later asks, how do you know you followed the rule correctly? What if the rule is not as simple as you think? This is the challenge presented by Kripke's rule-following skepticism. It's a thought experiment that questions whether we can truly be sure we are following rules correctly, or whether we're just repeating patterns without really understanding them. When we follow rules, how do we know we're doing it the right way? The problem begins when we realize that simply following a pattern doesn't necessarily mean we're following the intended rule. Imagine you're taught to add 2 to a number, but then you think, what if adding 2 isn't what the rule actually is? What if the rule is something else entirely, and we're just tricked into thinking we know it? Kripke's skepticism asks us to consider a situation where, even though we believe we're following the rule correctly, we could be doing it wrong without knowing it. It's as if we're caught in a loop, convinced we understand the rule, yet unable to prove we're not just repeating a false pattern. To explore this, think about how we learn language. When we hear a word, we associate it with a meaning. But how do we know that the meaning we associate with the word is the same as everyone else's? Can we be sure that we are truly following the right rule when we use a word, or are we just following a pattern of sounds and responses? In Kripke's example, you might be taught to add 2, but there's always the possibility that what you think is adding 2 could in fact be something else entirely. Maybe your 2 is actually a different operation, one you don't recognize. How would you ever know the difference when you have no way to compare your rule to an objective standard? The paradox deepens when we realize that we can't escape the possibility that our understanding of rules could be fundamentally flawed. No matter how confidently we follow them, we can't prove that we are doing it correctly, because there's no way to step outside of our own interpretations to verify it. This thought experiment raises deep questions about meaning and understanding. How do we know that our interpretation of a rule aligns with what the rule is supposed to be? Are we really following rules, or are we simply mimicking patterns without understanding their true essence? The skeptic's challenge is not that we don't follow rules, but that we can never be completely sure that we're following them correctly. What we take for granted as a simple, clear rule may be far more elusive and complex than we realize. The line between following the rule and misunderstanding it becomes blurred. This leads to a broader question about how we form knowledge. We often assume that we know what we know because we follow rules that seem clear and familiar. But what if the foundation of our knowledge is shakier than we think? What if we're only fooling ourselves into thinking we understand the rules we live by? Kripke's skepticism forces us to confront the possibility that our beliefs about the rules that guide our lives might be based on assumptions we can never fully verify. If we can't be sure we're following the rules correctly, how do we know that we're truly understanding anything at all? Consider how we use language. We rely on shared rules to communicate. But how do we know that our use of words matches others' understanding of those words? What if the way we use words, the rules we follow in communication, are not the same as the rules others follow? How can we ever know for sure? This question challenges the very notion of certainty. We live in a world of rules, rules for language, for math, for social interactions. But what if these rules are not as fixed as we believe? What if the sense of certainty we have about following them is based on an illusion, a pattern we repeat without ever truly understanding? Kripke's rule-following skepticism doesn't just question the rules of language or math, it questions our ability to truly understand anything. If the rules we follow can never be fully verified, then how do we know anything with certainty? Is all of our knowledge based on assumptions we can't prove? This thought experiment suggests that our understanding of truth and meaning might be far more fragile than we realize. It's not enough to simply follow patterns or repeat behaviors. We need to ask ourselves whether the rules we follow are the right ones, whether our understanding aligns with the deeper structure of reality. The skeptic doesn't deny that we follow rules or make meaningful statements. Instead, they ask us to consider whether we can ever be sure that the rules we follow are correct. Are we really following the rules of addition, for instance, or are we just following a pattern that seems like addition but is something else entirely? Kripke's skepticism forces us to rethink the foundations of knowledge. It shows that understanding and truth are not as straightforward as we might believe. The rules that govern our thinking, our behavior, and our language are not always as clear and fixed as they appear. There's always a deeper question, one that challenges our assumptions. The beauty of Kripke's rule-following skepticism lies in the fact that it doesn't give us easy answers. It invites us to think more deeply about how we know what we know, how we follow the rules we live by, and whether those rules are as solid as they seem. It reminds us that certainty is never as secure as we want it to be. As we continue to explore the rules that guide our lives, we must remember that our understanding is always subject to doubt. The patterns we follow might not be what they seem, and in that uncertainty, there is space for deeper inquiry, for deeper questioning, and for a more open understanding of the world around us. There is a box, and inside that box is a beetle. You can't see it, but you know it's there because you've been told. Now imagine that each person has their own box, with their own beetle inside. They can't see each other's beetles, and no one really knows what the beetles look like. This is Wittgenstein's Beetle in a Box. It's a thought experiment that invites us to think about the limits of language, meaning, and understanding. If everyone has their own beetle, how can we ever be sure that we are talking about the same thing when we use the word beetle? How do we know our words mean the same thing? The idea is simple but unsettling. If we each have a beetle, but we can't compare them directly, how do we know that we're all talking about the same thing when we say the word beetle? Even though the word might refer to something in each of our boxes, our understanding of what the word means might be entirely different. This raises a deep question about language. Words are supposed to carry meaning, but Wittgenstein shows us that meaning isn't as simple as pointing to a thing. If we can't see each other's beetles, how can we be sure that our use of the word beetle matches up with what others are thinking when they use it? How do we know that we're really talking about the same thing? Wittgenstein's Beetle in a Box forces us to confront the idea that meaning is not just about what we see or experience, it's about how we understand and communicate that experience with others. If we can't compare our mental images, our experiences, then how do we know that our words are grounded in the same reality? Think of it like this: we each have our own private world inside our minds. We may think we're describing the same thing, but how can we be sure? Maybe your beetle is different from mine. Or maybe we both have very different mental pictures of what a beetle is, even though we use the same word to describe it. This thought experiment invites us to consider the limitations of language. We often assume that words have a fixed meaning, that when we use them, they refer to something shared, something real. But Wittgenstein suggests that meaning is not something fixed or private. It's shaped by how we use words within a community, how we agree on what words refer to in the context of our shared experiences. The beetle in a box also raises important questions about knowledge. How do we know what's inside someone else's mind? How can we be sure that when we speak, our meaning is truly understood by others? Our words might appear to be clear, but are they really conveying the same meaning to everyone who hears them? Consider how we talk about abstract concepts, like love or beauty. We all use the same words, but do we all mean the same thing? Just as we can't compare the beetles in our boxes, we can't compare the private meanings we assign to these concepts. Each person's understanding of love, for instance, is shaped by their own experiences which are invisible to others. The beetle in a box suggests that language is not a simple tool for conveying fixed meanings. It's a complex shared practice that only works when we use words in ways that are understood within a particular context. If everyone's experiences are private, how do we ensure that our shared words accurately reflect our experiences, our truths? This leads us to rethink the nature of truth. If meaning is shaped by private experiences, and words are just tools for communicating those experiences, can we ever fully grasp the truth of what others mean when they speak? Truth, Wittgenstein seems to suggest, isn't something that can be fully shared. It's always filtered through our individual perceptions. The beetle in a box forces us to confront the idea that understanding is never complete, never absolute. Even when we think we know exactly what someone means, we can never fully access their private experience. We are always separated by a barrier, a veil between our inner world and theirs. Language bridges the gap, but it's not perfect. In a way, this thought experiment highlights the fragility of communication. We might think that by using the same words we understand each other, but Wittgenstein suggests that our understanding is never as clear as we think. Every time we speak, we're making an assumption that the other person's understanding of the word matches ours. This is not to say that communication is impossible. On the contrary, Wittgenstein's point is that we communicate by sharing common practices, by using words in ways that are mutually understood within a context. Language is not a perfect tool for capturing truth, but it's the best tool we have for navigating the world together. The beetle in a box also challenges the idea that our personal experiences are entirely ours. The word beetle may refer to something private in each of our minds, but it only gains meaning through our use of it in a shared language. In this sense, our inner worlds are not isolated. They are shaped by the words we use to connect with others. Ultimately, Wittgenstein's beetle in a box is a meditation on the limits of language and meaning. It shows us that the words we use are never as precise as we think. They are always mediated by our personal experiences and by the shared practices of the communities we belong to. And in that we find both the beauty and the challenge of communication. Imagine you're standing in front of a vast, blank wall. On this wall are endless truths waiting to be discovered. But here's the catch. The more you look at it, the more you realize that some of these truths can never be fully known. They are hidden behind an invisible barrier. This is the paradox of knowability. It's the idea that while we strive to understand everything around us, some truths are inherently out of reach. No matter how hard we try, certain aspects of reality remain unknowable. The paradox isn't just about what we don't know, it's about what we can never truly know. The paradox begins with the simplest question: can we know everything? It feels natural to assume that with enough time and effort, we could uncover every truth about the universe. But what if some truths are beyond the grasp of human understanding? What if there are limits to what we can know? No matter how much we learn, The idea of unknowable truths challenges our view of knowledge itself. We tend to think that if something is true, then we should be able to know it. But the paradox of knowability suggests that some truths are hidden, not because we're not looking hard enough, but because they are fundamentally beyond our reach. This paradox brings up a deeper question about the nature of knowledge. If there are truths that can never be known, how do we understand the limits of our own knowledge? Can we ever be sure that what we know represents the full truth, or are we always working with incomplete pictures of reality? Think about a simple fact, like the color of the sky. You might see it as blue, while someone else might see it as a different shade of blue. But what if, beyond our perception, the true nature of the sky is something we can never fully comprehend? Our minds, our senses, may only capture fragments of reality. The paradox of knowability invites us to accept that our understanding is always partial. It's not just about what we can't see or grasp, it's about the nature of the things we don't even know we can't know. We might spend our lives seeking answers, but some truths will always remain elusive, hidden behind a veil we cannot lift. It's like trying to touch the horizon. No matter how far we walk, it always seems just out of reach. The closer we get, the further it seems to move. Some truths are like that. We might think we're getting closer to understanding them, but they always stay just beyond our grasp, no matter how much effort we put in. This realization doesn't mean we stop searching for answers, but it does change how we approach truth. Instead of assuming that every question has a clear answer, we learn to embrace the mystery. Some things may always be beyond our understanding, but that doesn't mean we can't find meaning in what we can know. The paradox also forces us to rethink the value of knowledge. If some truths are unknowable, then what does it mean to know something? Is knowledge just about accumulating facts, or is it about recognizing the limits of what we can truly understand? Maybe the most profound knowledge is knowing where our understanding ends. The paradox of knowability challenges the very foundation of our search for truth. If we can never know everything, how do we navigate the vast ocean of knowledge? Can we still find meaning in a world full of questions, many of which may never be answered? It's a reminder that seeking truth is more than just about finding answers. Imagine for a moment standing on the edge of a great ocean, knowing that you can only explore a small part of it. You can dive deep, learn much, but there will always be parts of the ocean that remain hidden, untouched by your knowledge. The vast unknown stretches out before you, just beyond your reach. But the ocean is still there, full of wonders, full of truths waiting to be discovered. The paradox of knowability doesn't close the door to knowledge, it opens it wider, allowing us to explore what we can, while acknowledging that some truths are simply beyond us. This acceptance of mystery adds depth to our journey. In some ways, the paradox invites us to embrace uncertainty. It teaches us that we don't have to have all the answers to live meaningful lives. We can seek, we can wonder, we can explore, knowing that the unknown is just as important as the known. Truth in this sense becomes a journey rather than a destination. This thought experiment also raises a question about how we define truth itself. If some truths are unknowable, then is truth something absolute, or is it always in flux, shaped by the limitations of our understanding? Truth may not be a static thing, but a dynamic process shaped by what we know and what we are still discovering. In some ways, the paradox gives us permission to be humble. We might never understand everything, and that's okay. The process of seeking truth is valuable in itself. Each step forward, no matter how small, brings us closer to a deeper understanding, even if we can never fully grasp the whole picture. The paradox of knowability is not just a question about what we can't know, it's a reflection on the nature of knowledge itself. It challenges us to accept that truth is often more complex than we can imagine, and that some mysteries will remain unsolved, perhaps forever. As we explore the world, we must remember that the questions we ask, the answers we find, and the truths we seek are all part of an ongoing process. The horizon of knowledge will always move, but in that movement we continue to grow, learn, and explore, always with the knowledge that some truths will remain hidden. You hold an object in your hand, a small rock. You know it's a rock because that's the word you've always used to describe something like it. But what if the word rock didn't just mean the object itself, but was shaped by the world around it, by things you've never considered? This is the essence of semantic externalism, a concept that challenges our understanding of meaning. According to this theory, the meaning of words doesn't just come from inside our minds, it's shaped by the external world and our interactions with it. The meaning of rock is not just what's in your mind, it's also tied to the world around you. Imagine two people, each holding the same rock. They both call it a rock, but their understanding of what makes it a rock is different. One may have studied geology, knowing the rock's mineral composition, while the other simply sees it as a piece of nature. Their meaning of rock is shaped by their experiences with it. In semantic externalism, the meaning of the word rock depends on more than just the individual's internal concept of it. It's influenced by the environment, the context, and even the way society uses the word. Meaning is not just about mental images, it's about the connection between our words and the world we inhabit. This idea invites us to reconsider how we think about truth. If meaning is shaped by external factors, does that mean that truth is also influenced by the world around us? It suggests that truth isn't something that exists solely in our minds. It's something that connects us to the world, something we can only fully understand by considering the context in which we live. Think about the word water. When you say water, you may be thinking of clear liquid H2O. But someone who lives in a desert might think of water in a different way, maybe as something precious, rare, and valuable. Their understanding of water is shaped by their experience with it. Meaning and truth aren't fixed. Semantic externalism forces us to recognize that words have a life of their own. They don't just sit in our minds, waiting for us to assign meaning to them. They are tied to the world, to the people we interact with, and to the experiences we have. Meaning exists in the space between our thoughts and the world. This can feel unsettling. If words mean different things to different people, how can we ever be sure that we fully understand each other? How can we be certain that the words we use match the realities others see? The world of meaning becomes more complex, more fluid, and harder to grasp. But this complexity doesn't make communication impossible, it makes it more interesting. Understanding meaning as something shaped by both internal thoughts and external contexts opens up new ways of thinking about language. It shows us that the meaning of a word can grow and change, depending on where we are and who we are with. Imagine, for example, how the word bank can mean a financial institution or the side of a river. The meaning of the word is shaped by the context in which it is used. Even though the word sounds the same, its meaning is rooted in the world around it. This external influence shapes the truth we communicate. This also challenges the idea of knowledge. If meaning depends on the world, then how can we be sure that what we know is universal, that it's true everywhere and for everyone? Knowledge itself might be shaped by our surroundings, and truth might look different depending on where you stand, who you talk to, and what you experience. Semantic externalism suggests that our understanding of reality is never just an internal affair. We are constantly interacting with the world, and this interaction shapes what we know, what we believe, and what we say. Truth in this sense becomes a shared experience, something that is influenced by our relationship with the world. This leads us to think more deeply about how we form our beliefs. When we say something is true, we're not just asserting something from within our minds, we're connecting our thoughts to the world. Our words, our beliefs, are not isolated, they are part of a larger web of meaning, shaped by our environment. And yet, even as we think about the external world shaping meaning, it's important to remember that we are still active participants in this process. We don't just passively receive meaning from the world, we actively engage with it, interpreting and negotiating the meaning of words and concepts based on our experiences. Semantic externalism challenges us to see language as a living thing. Words are not static, they evolve, grow, and shift depending on how we use them in the world. Truth, too, becomes a dynamic process. It's not something we find once and for all, but something we constantly engage with, shaped by our environment, our conversations, and our experiences. As we navigate the world of language, we come to understand that the meaning of words is never entirely fixed. Words are always in motion, and so too is truth. It is not something we simply know, it is something we participate in, something we share with others, shaped by both our internal thoughts and the world outside us. In this way, semantic externalism gives us a richer, more complex understanding of truth. It shows us that truth is not just something we possess, it's something we are constantly interacting with, something that depends on the world we live in, the people we talk to, and the experiences we have. Imagine you are reading a book, its pages filled with words and stories, but before you begin the first chapter, there's a preface. The preface is a brief introduction that sets the stage, giving you context for what's to come. It guides your expectations, helping you understand how to approach the book. Now here's the paradox: can you truly understand the book before you've read it? The preface, while helpful, shapes your understanding before you even dive into the main content. But if the preface informs your view of the book, then how can you trust that your understanding is independent of it? This is the Preface Paradox. It presents a challenge about the relationship between knowledge and expectation. When you read a book, the preface frames your understanding of the story. It influences how you interpret each chapter, each idea. But how do you know that your interpretation isn't shaped by the preface itself? Consider how this works in everyday life. We often make decisions based on what we know, but what we know is often shaped by experiences, expectations, and prior knowledge. Just like the preface of a book, these prior influences can color how we see the world. Can we ever truly approach anything with a fresh perspective, free from these prior expectations? The paradox becomes clearer when we think about how we learn. When we first encounter a new idea, we often approach it with some pre-existing understanding or belief. The preface to our learning journey sets our expectations, and those expectations guide us, sometimes without us even realizing it. How do we separate the influence of the preface from the truth of the book itself? This leads to a deeper question about truth. Can truth exist independently of our expectations and interpretations? If everything we understand is shaped by prior knowledge, can we ever truly know something for what it is, without being influenced by the preface of our experiences? Think about how we understand people. When we meet someone new, our judgment of them is often influenced by what others have told us, or by the first impression they give us. Our understanding of them is shaped by a kind of preface, whether we realize it or not. This preface guides how we interpret their actions and words, even if they are not the person we've made them out to be. This idea is especially important when we think about how knowledge is passed down. Our understanding of history, science, or even art is often influenced by the lens through which we learn it. Just as the preface of a book shapes our view of the story, the context in which we learn shapes our view of truth. Can we ever see the world purely, without the lens of expectation coloring it? The Preface Paradox reminds us that all knowledge is to some extent filtered. It's shaped by the frameworks, ideas, and expectations that come before it. The challenge, then, is to understand how much of what we know is truly independent and how much of it has been shaped by the prefaces we've encountered. In a way, this paradox shows us the complexity of truth. It suggests that truth is not something fixed and independent of us, but something that is always influenced by how we come to know it. Our understanding of the world is always filtered through the prefaces of our lives, our experiences, and our expectations. So how do we navigate this paradox? If every new idea is shaped by what came before, can we trust our knowledge? The answer might lie in recognizing that we are never fully free from influence, but this recognition doesn't diminish the value of our understanding. It simply invites us to approach truth with a deeper awareness of how our prior knowledge shapes it. This also challenges our sense of certainty. If everything we know is shaped by some form of preface, how can we be sure that we're seeing things clearly? Maybe certainty isn't about removing all prefaces, but about recognizing them and understanding how they influence our perspective. Awareness of the preface allows us to see the world more fully. The Preface Paradox invites us to reflect on how we approach new experiences. When we try to understand something or someone, how much of our view is based on expectations, how much of what we know is shaped by the framework we've built around it. This isn't about doubting what we know, but about deepening our awareness of how we come to know it. It also makes us rethink the nature of knowledge itself. Knowledge isn't just about discovering facts, it's about understanding the context in which those facts exist. The preface to any story, idea, or experience is part of that context. It shapes what we know and how we know it, which means that knowledge is never as pure or objective as we might hope. The paradox also asks us to think about how we communicate truth to others. When we share our understanding of something, how much of that truth is colored by our own expectations, beliefs, and past experiences. The prefaces we present to others influence how they see the world, just as their prefaces shape their view of our words. In this way, the preface paradox teaches us that knowledge is always in motion. It's not a fixed point that we reach once and for all, but a process that is constantly influenced by the prefaces we encounter along the way. Understanding isn't about achieving a final truth, it's about learning how to navigate the many layers of meaning that come before it. As we continue to explore the world around us, we must remember that everything we know is shaped by context. The prefaces of our lives guide us, influencing how we understand what comes next. The challenge is not to remove the prefaces, but to become aware of them, so we can approach truth with clarity and openness. The preface paradox, then, is not just about knowledge, it's about how we approach the world. It asks us to consider how much of what we understand is shaped by what has come before. And in recognizing that, we find a deeper understanding of both the truths we encounter and the ways we come to know them. There's a pile of sand. You can't deny it. It's clearly there in front of you. Now take one grain away. You look at the pile again. Is it still a pile? You might think so, but what if you keep taking away one grain at a time? When does it stop being a pile? This is the Sorites Paradox, a question that challenges our understanding of vague concepts. It's about how we draw lines between things that seem clear, like a pile of sand, but become unclear when we start making small changes. At what point does a pile of sand cease to be a pile? Imagine you have a tall stack of books. You remove one book at a time. It's easy to say that when the stack is gone, it's no longer a stack, but what if there's just one book left? Is that still a stack? The paradox comes from the fact that each removal doesn't seem to make a meaningful difference. The same idea applies to other vague terms in life. Think of a heap of anything, leaves, stones, or even time. At what point does the heap stop being a heap? The Sorites Paradox shows us that we often struggle to define exactly where the shift happens, even if it seems obvious when the change is complete. It's not just about sand or books. This paradox extends to many parts of life. For example, consider age. At what age does someone stop being a child and become an adult? It's easy to think of someone as a child or as an adult, but where do we draw that line? The Sorites Paradox asks us to think carefully about such boundaries. The paradox isn't just a thought experiment, it's something we face every day. We use words like tall, old, or rich to describe things, but those words aren't always precise. We know what we mean, but how do we know where the cutoff is? When does someone stop being young or wealthy enough? The trouble with the Sorites Paradox is that there's no clear answer. There's no single grain of sand that causes the pile to stop being a pile. It's not as simple as taking one book away and saying now it's no longer a stack. It's a gradual process, one that makes it difficult to define exactly when something changes. As you think about the pile of sand, you realize that you can't pinpoint the exact moment it stops being a pile. Is it the 100th grain, the 1000th, or some other number. It's hard to say because the change is so gradual, yet we feel confident calling it a pile at the beginning and not a pile at the end. This leads to a bigger question about language. We rely on words to describe the world, but how precise are those words? Are terms like heap or stack truly meaningful, or are they just convenient labels we use, even though they lack clear boundaries? The Sorites Paradox invites us to consider how language shapes our understanding of reality. In the case of the pile, we can see the problem in action. Each time you remove a grain, the pile seems the same. But there's a point where the pile is no longer a pile. The paradox highlights the struggle between our need for clear categories and the messy, gradual nature of change. So what do we do with this paradox? It challenges us to embrace the idea that not everything in life can be neatly defined. Some concepts, like piles or age, are fluid. The boundaries we create around them are often arbitrary, shaped by our language, our perceptions, and our assumptions. But just because a concept is vague doesn't mean it's useless. The Sorites Paradox invites us to think more deeply about how we categorize the world. It encourages us to be comfortable with uncertainty, to accept that not every question has a precise answer, and that sometimes things shift gradually in ways we can't fully pin down. We see this in everyday decisions too. When do we cross the line between being a little late and being too late? When do we stop being a beginner and start being an expert? These are questions that don't have clear-cut answers, yet we still make them all the time. What's fascinating about the Sorites Paradox is that it reveals something profound about the way we think. We tend to want clear categories and definitions, but the world doesn't always fit into those neat boxes. Some truths, it seems, exist in the space between the boundaries we try to draw. This paradox also highlights the way we navigate change. We may think of ourselves as young for a long time, but gradually the years pass, and one day we realize we've crossed the line. The shift isn't always noticeable, but it happens. The Sorites Paradox reminds us that sometimes change is subtle, and that's okay. In a way, the paradox is a mirror. It shows us how we perceive the world and how we try to categorize it. But it also shows us that those categories are often arbitrary, shaped by our needs and our language. We use them to make sense of the world, even when they don't have sharp edges. Ultimately, the Sorites Paradox isn't just about piles of sand or books. It's about the way we understand and define everything in our lives. It asks us to think more carefully about the categories we use and to accept that some things, like truth, are more fluid, more complex, and less defined than we might expect. You wake up in the morning, stretch and glance outside your window. The sun rises, just as it has every day. You expect the same thing will happen tomorrow and the next day. But what if one day it didn't? What would you base your certainty on? How do we know the future will resemble the past? This is the problem of induction, presented by David Hume. It asks a simple but profound question. Why do we believe that the future will unfold in the same way as the past? Every time we observe the sun rising, we expect it will rise again tomorrow. But is that expectation truly justified? We rely on patterns and experiences to make predictions about the future. We see the sun rise every day, and so we conclude that it will always rise. But Hume challenges this assumption. He points out that we have no guarantee that the future will follow the same pattern. Our experience of the past doesn't prove that the future will be the same. Imagine you've seen thousands of red apples, and each one has been sweet. You might think that the next apple you pick will also be sweet, but is that certain? What if for the first time you pick an apple that's sour? The pattern you've seen doesn't guarantee the future. The sour apple is always a possibility. Hume's problem shows us that inductive reasoning, drawing conclusions based on patterns, doesn't provide the certainty we often think it does. Even if something has happened consistently in the past, there's no logical reason that it must happen the same way again. The future could always surprise us, even when we feel certain it will follow the same path. This paradox challenges the way we think about knowledge. We often take for granted that the world will behave in a predictable way, that patterns will repeat. But Hume asks us to question whether this belief is based on sound reasoning or simply an assumption we've made over time. The problem of induction also exposes the limits of human reasoning. We think we understand the world because of the patterns we observe, but those patterns might not be as reliable as we believe. We may be making predictions about the future that have no firm foundation. The universe may not follow the same rules tomorrow. This doesn't mean we stop using induction altogether. It's practical and useful for making decisions in our daily lives. But Hume's problem invites us to recognize that our conclusions are not as certain as they may seem. Inductive reasoning might give us a good approximation of what's likely to happen, but it can never guarantee the truth of our predictions. Think about how we use induction in science. We observe patterns, form hypotheses, and make predictions about the world. But science, like everyday reasoning, relies on induction. It can't prove that the laws of nature will always work the same way tomorrow. It can only show that they have worked in the same way in the past. This uncertainty doesn't mean we abandon knowledge or predictions. It simply forces us to recognize that the future is not fully within our grasp. No matter how many times we observe the sun rising, we can never be absolutely sure it will rise tomorrow. Induction is a tool, but it's not a guarantee. The problem of induction shows us that certainty is often more fragile than we realize. We believe in patterns, but we can never know for sure that those patterns will continue. Our knowledge is based on observation and experience, but it is always subject to the possibility of change, of the unexpected. Hume's insight also raises questions about our confidence in the way we understand the world. If we cannot know the future with certainty, how do we make sense of the patterns we see around us? Are our beliefs based on reason and evidence, or are they simply habits of thought we've developed over time? Consider how we interact with the world. We assume that the sun will rise, that the sky will be blue, and that gravity will work the same way it always has. These assumptions guide our actions and decisions, but how do we know they're true? How do we justify our beliefs about the world when the future could always surprise us? The problem of induction is a humbling reminder that our knowledge is never complete, never absolute. It's a reflection of the limitations of our understanding. We can form reasonable expectations based on past experience, but we must remain open to the possibility that the future could unfold in ways we cannot predict. This doesn't mean we stop seeking knowledge or making predictions. It means we learn to live with uncertainty, accepting that some things are always beyond our control. Hume's problem invites us to think about how we approach the world, how we make sense of our experiences, and how we deal with the unknown. The paradox challenges us to embrace a deeper humility. It reminds us that even our most certain beliefs, the things we take for granted, are always subject to doubt. Knowledge is not about finding absolute truths, but about understanding the limits of our certainty and learning to navigate the world with that understanding. In this light, the problem of induction also calls us to appreciate the unpredictability of the world. It asks us to recognize that, despite all our reasoning and predictions, the future is not something we can fully know. The universe will continue to surprise us, and our knowledge will always be a work in progress. Ultimately, Hume's problem of induction doesn't just question the reliability of our predictions, it challenges the very nature of knowledge and certainty, urging us to reflect on how we understand the world and reminding us that the future, with all its possibilities, is always just beyond our grasp. You stand before a painting, its colors bright and vivid. It captures a scene of a meadow under a soft blue sky. You look at it, and you feel sure that it represents a beautiful landscape. But then, what if this painting is not an exact representation of the meadow, but only a close version of it? This is the problem of verisimilitude, a thought experiment that explores the idea of how close something can be to the truth without actually being true. It's the question of how we measure something that approximates reality, but doesn't perfectly reflect it. How do we know if we're getting closer to the truth, or simply to a more convincing illusion? Imagine you are trying to explain a sunset. You describe the colors, the light, and the shapes in the sky. Someone else listens carefully and tells you, yes, I understand. But what if their experience of the sunset, while similar, isn't exactly the same as yours? How do we measure their understanding of the sunset compared to the truth? Verisimilitude asks whether we can ever truly capture the essence of something, or if we're always just approximating it. A theory, an idea, or even a story may be very close to the truth, but how can we be sure it isn't just a replica? How can we compare the closeness of an idea to the truth itself? Take science, for example. Scientists often work with models and theories to explain natural phenomena. These models can get closer and closer to explaining reality, but can we ever be sure they are fully true? Are we simply finding models that are better approximations of the truth without ever reaching the absolute truth? The problem of verisimilitude arises when we realize that our closest models of the truth may still be just representations. They might be very good at predicting the future or explaining the past, but how do we know we aren't just creating more convincing illusions? At what point do we accept an approximation as close enough? In this context, truth doesn't seem like a fixed destination, but rather something we keep striving towards. The closer we get to the truth, the more it seems to shift, always just beyond our reach. Verisimilitude asks us whether we can ever cross the line from approximation to full truth, or if we're always hovering near it. Consider how we form beliefs about the world. We take in observations, we form ideas, and we constantly update our understanding. But how do we know that the beliefs we hold are actually the truth? Are we simply finding the most convincing, yet still incomplete, models of the world? How do we draw the line? The paradox at the heart of the problem of verisimilitude is that there's always a tension between what we know and what we can know. Even if our ideas are useful, helpful, or predictive, they may still be far from the truth. How can we measure the distance between our closest theories and the reality they aim to describe? As you think about the sunset or the painting, you realize that it's not always clear where truth ends and approximation begins. Sometimes, a small difference in detail might feel significant, but other times, the difference feels so minor that it doesn't seem to matter. How do we decide when we're close enough to the truth? The problem extends beyond science to everyday life. How do we know when we've understood something fully, or if our understanding is merely a good approximation? In relationships, in art, in decisions, we are constantly navigating this gap between what we believe to be true and what might be the deeper hidden truth. Verisimilitude also challenges our understanding of progress. We often think that with more information, with better tools, we will eventually uncover the truth. But what if progress is not a straight line? What if we're simply refining our understanding, making it more and more similar to the truth, but never quite touching it? This leads to a broader reflection on how we approach knowledge. If the truth is always just out of reach, do we give up trying to understand? Or do we continue, accepting that our understanding will always be an approximation, and that striving for closeness is still valuable? Consider the process of learning. Every new fact we encounter shapes our understanding, moving us closer to a more accurate view of the world. But how do we know when we've reached the truth? Is the truth something we find by reaching an ideal point, or is it something that becomes clearer with each new insight? Verisimilitude is a reminder that we don't always need perfect knowledge to act, to decide, or to understand. Sometimes, the closest approximation we have is good enough. In our quest for truth, we may need to embrace uncertainty, knowing that our understanding will always be a work in progress, a step towards something greater. The paradox also invites us to think about the value of approximation. While truth may be elusive, our approximations, our models, our theories, our beliefs are still meaningful. They help us navigate the world, solve problems, and find purpose. We might never know the whole truth, but that doesn't mean our approximations are without value. In this sense, the problem of verisimilitude isn't just about the limits of knowledge, it's about recognizing the worth of the journey. It's about understanding that our search for truth, even if it never fully reaches its goal, is still valuable. Each step brings us closer to a deeper understanding, even if that understanding is always incomplete. As we continue to explore the world and our understanding of it, we carry with us the awareness that the truth may be far off, but that the pursuit itself shapes who we are. Our search for verisimilitude, for the closest match to the truth, becomes an ongoing process that enriches our lives and our understanding of reality. You walk through a forest, your feet crunching on the fallen leaves. Above you, a raven flies by. You notice the bird is black. You think to yourself, all ravens are black. It seems like a logical conclusion based on what you've seen. But then, what about all the other things you see in the world? This is the raven paradox, a puzzle that forces us to think about how we make conclusions. We observe a black raven, and it fits perfectly with our idea of what a raven is. But what if we see something else? A white cat, perhaps, or a green apple? How does that affect the truth of our statement, all ravens are black? At first glance, it seems obvious. If we see enough black ravens, we become more and more certain of our claim. The more black ravens we observe, the more our belief is supported. But then we realize something strange. Every time we see something that isn't a raven, let's say a red ball, it still seems to support our claim, simply because it isn't a black raven. How can something that isn't even a raven help confirm the truth of our statement about ravens? It seems odd, doesn't it? If we see a red ball, it's not a raven, and yet it seems to add to the evidence that all ravens are black. The paradox challenges our idea of how evidence works in supporting a belief. The raven paradox is a puzzle about how we gather evidence and use it to form conclusions. We typically think that only things directly related to our claim can help prove it. Seeing more black ravens makes sense, but seeing something completely unrelated, like a green tree, also seems to support the same conclusion, though it's not directly connected to ravens at all. This paradox forces us to think about what counts as evidence. When we search for truth, we naturally focus on things that are directly relevant to our claim. But does that mean unrelated evidence doesn't matter? If a red ball supports the idea that all ravens are black, does that mean we have to reconsider how we view evidence altogether? You might find yourself questioning what counts as good evidence. It's easy to see how a black raven fits perfectly into the picture, but a non-raven object, like a red ball, seems to complicate things. It doesn't seem like it should support our claim. Yet in the logic of the paradox it does. The paradox also raises deeper questions about the nature of truth. Can a statement be true because of unrelated facts? Should the truth of all ravens are black depend on what other things exist in the world, even if they have nothing to do with ravens? The raven paradox shows how complicated it can be to gather evidence and understand what is true. It's like trying to piece together a puzzle. Some pieces seem to fit perfectly, while others seem to belong to an entirely different puzzle. Yet, according to the paradox, those other pieces still contribute to the overall picture. Every time we find something that isn't a raven, it still seems to fit our theory, whether it's helpful or not. This leaves us with an important question. When we claim to know something, how do we know if we have enough relevant evidence to support it? The raven paradox shows us that even irrelevant evidence can seem to support a theory, but should it? Are we missing something crucial by accepting unrelated evidence, or is there something deeper at play here? In everyday life, we make conclusions based on patterns and observations. If we see a series of black birds, we begin to expect that future birds will be black. But the paradox invites us to think about how these conclusions are drawn. Are we interpreting evidence properly, or are we being misled by the unexpected? The raven paradox asks us to reconsider our approach to reasoning. What if the evidence we rely on isn't as relevant as we think? What if the things we dismiss as unimportant could actually shape the truth of our claims? In this sense, the paradox challenges us to look more closely at how we gather and interpret evidence. Imagine a scientist studying the behavior of birds. They observe hundreds of black ravens and come to the conclusion that all ravens are black. But what if the scientists' focus on black ravens blinds them to other possibilities, to the exceptions that may lie outside their initial observations? The paradox reminds us that even seemingly irrelevant facts may play a role in shaping the truth. The Raven paradox also speaks to how we define concepts. What does it mean for something to be true? Can we truly define a concept, like the color of a raven, based on the evidence we've gathered, or is our understanding always subject to new discoveries that challenge or complicate our beliefs? When we believe in something, we often focus on the facts that seem to directly support our claim. But the paradox shows that the truth is messier. Evidence isn't always as straightforward as we think. The world is full of unrelated facts, and sometimes those facts can still influence what we believe to be true. The Raven paradox reminds us that knowledge is often more complex than we realize. It challenges the neatness of our beliefs and encourages us to think more carefully about how we draw conclusions. Can we trust that every piece of evidence, no matter how unrelated it seems, actually contributes to the truth of what we know? As we navigate the world, we are constantly gathering evidence, making observations, and forming beliefs. But the Raven paradox asks us to question whether the evidence we rely on is always as relevant as we think. It teaches us that the truth is often shaped by factors we don't always recognize, reminding us to be cautious in our pursuit of certainty. You make a simple statement, one that feels true: the sky is blue. You believe it. It's clear. It's evident. But now think about it. Why is it true that the sky is blue? What makes this statement true? And how do we know that the truth we speak is genuine? This is the core of the disquotational theory of truth. It's a theory that explores how we understand the nature of truth, and it might sound simple. A statement is true if and only if the statement itself accurately reflects reality. The sky is blue. And that's true because that's what the statement means. Imagine you tell someone, the sky is blue. In doing so, you are not merely using the word true as a separate concept. You're asserting that what you say about the world corresponds to what is real. The disquotational theory says that truth doesn't require a complicated definition. It's just the agreement between our words and the world. The theory can be captured with this simple idea: if you say the sky is blue and the sky is indeed blue, then your statement is true. Truth, in this view, isn't about some deeper mysterious quality. It's about the statement matching up with the reality it describes. It's almost as if truth is a mirror, simply reflecting the world as it is. For example, if you say snow is white, the truth of this statement is clear because snow is indeed white. There's no need for complex explanations. The truth is inherent in the words themselves. The disquotational theory suggests that truth is as straightforward as that, a reflection of what is in the world. This might sound too simple, but that's the beauty of it. It eliminates the need for deep philosophical explanations of what makes something true. If a statement is true, it's true because it corresponds to something real in the world. Truth, according to this theory, doesn't need to be more complicated than the statement's direct connection to reality. However, this simplicity raises a question. If truth is just the correspondence between a statement and reality, what about the concept of falsehood? If something is false, does that simply mean the statement does not match reality? It's easy to see truth this way, but can we apply the same logic to falsehoods too? Consider the statement, the sky is green. This is clearly false because it does not match the reality of the sky. According to the disquotational theory, falsehoods work in the same way as truth. A statement is false simply when it doesn't correspond to reality. If a statement is true because it matches reality, a false statement is one that doesn't. But then what happens when we use the word truth in more complicated ways, like when we speak about abstract concepts or ideas? Can we still use the disquotational theory to explain the truth of those statements? For example, how do we apply this simple idea of truth to something like justice or freedom? These concepts, while real in their impact on society, aren't things you can touch or see in the same way you see the sky or snow. The disquotational theory of truth works easily with statements about things that can be directly observed. But how do we handle ideas and ideals that don't have a direct physical counterpart? One way to think about this is that we continue to rely on the same basic idea: a statement is true when it reflects the world. But when we talk about abstract ideas, we still measure them against the world, even if that world includes people's experiences, actions, and beliefs. Truth, in this sense, is still about what the statement reflects, just in a broader context. The theory suggests that truth isn't something hidden or complex. It doesn't require deep layers of explanation to understand. Instead, it's about words matching reality. We don't need to explore some deeper, esoteric concept of truth. We simply understand truth as the direct correspondence between our statements and the world. This simplicity can be powerful. It means that truth isn't something distant or inaccessible. It's right here, embedded in the language we use every day. When we say the sun rises in the east, we don't need to explain what makes it true. It's true because it matches the reality we observe. However, the disquotational theory of truth also has its limitations. While it works well for direct, observable facts, it doesn't help much with more abstract concepts like morality or emotions. How do we use this simple theory when we talk about things that aren't so easily seen or measured? Truth in these areas becomes more complicated. Think about how we describe beauty or love. We can say, love is powerful, or beauty is in the eye of the beholder. These statements may be true in a certain sense, but they aren't as easy to confirm as a statement about the sky. The disquotational theory struggles to explain these abstract truths because they depend on personal perspectives and experiences. This brings us back to the question of whether truth is just about matching reality. Maybe truth isn't always about physical objects, but also about ideas, experiences, and relationships. The disquotational theory makes it easy to see truth as a simple reflection of reality, but it leaves us wondering how we handle the more intangible aspects of life. The beauty of the disquotational theory is in its simplicity. It offers a clear, straightforward way to understand truth. But its limitations also make us realize that truth may not always be as simple as we first think. Sometimes, truth is more complex, tied to the world in ways that are harder to capture. Yet, even with its simplicity, the disquotational theory of truth helps us understand one fundamental thing: truth is about what matches reality. It doesn't hide in complexity. It's a reflection of the world we know, and in that clarity, we find a deeper understanding of what it means to know something truly. As we continue to explore different ideas of truth, we are reminded that sometimes the simplest answers are the most profound. Truth, at its core, may just be the alignment of our words with the world around us, and that connection can reveal a lot more than we might expect. You are walking through a forest, the path ahead clear and open. You know where you're going. But as you walk, you notice the trees begin to thin. The ground changes, and you find yourself in unfamiliar territory. Was this the path you were meant to follow, or have you strayed? This is the core of Nozick's tracking theory of truth. It's a theory about how we know what is true. It suggests that for a belief to be true, it must track the reality it refers to, much like a compass that always points north. It should reflect the world as it truly is, consistently. Imagine you believe the sky is blue. You look up and see the blue sky, so you think your belief is true. According to Nozick's theory, the belief tracks the truth because it aligns with reality. But what if the sky suddenly changes to gray? Does your belief still hold? Does it track the new reality? Tracking theory says that truth isn't just about having a belief that corresponds with the world at one moment. It's about the ability of that belief to keep aligning with reality, even as it changes. The belief must track the truth across time, responding to shifts in the world in a way that keeps it accurate. For Nozick, truth involves more than just matching our beliefs with what's in front of us. It's about how well those beliefs adapt when new information comes in, when the world changes. If our beliefs can adjust and still reflect the world, then they are more than just coincidental, they are genuinely true. Consider a weather forecast. If the forecast says it will rain, and it does, you believe the forecast is true. But if the weather shifts and it doesn't rain, your belief doesn't track the truth anymore. For Nozick, this is where truth becomes more than just matching. It's about consistency with reality, even when things change. This brings us to the key idea of Nozick's theory. Tracking is not simply about believing something and finding evidence for it. It's about finding a belief that corresponds to reality. Even as reality shifts, if your belief no longer matches what happens in the world, then it is no longer true. Nozick's theory helps explain why our beliefs about the world are not always reliable. Beliefs that are static, that don't change with new information, might not track reality in the right way. True beliefs must adjust, like a compass that always corrects itself, pointing to what's real, even if the terrain shifts. Think about a weathered traveler who knows the direction of a distant city. Even if the road curves, the traveler can still navigate their way, adjusting when needed. This is how Nozick's tracking theory sees truth. It's about the ability of a belief to maintain its direction, even when conditions change. Now imagine you believe that all swans are white. You see a white swan and you feel your belief is true. But what if one day you see a black swan? Does your belief still track the truth? According to Nozick, your belief has failed to track the new reality because it was too rigid and didn't adjust. This brings up a deeper point about how we form beliefs. If we believe something is true, like all swans being white, we might think we are right until the world challenges that belief. For Nozick, truth is not about staying comfortable with what we already believe, but about the willingness to adapt and update when reality changes. Nozick's theory doesn't just tell us that beliefs should match reality. It tells us that beliefs must change to keep matching reality as it evolves. If a belief doesn't adjust when the world does, then it is no longer true. Truth is dynamic, and so too must our beliefs be if they are to remain true. Consider how we adapt to new information in our lives. We change our beliefs about many things over time, whether it's about the weather, people, or even ideas. Nozick's theory says that this adaptive ability is what makes our beliefs true. They must track the changing world, never being stuck in the past. In this way, Nozick's tracking theory offers a powerful tool for thinking about truth. It doesn't just require a simple match between belief and reality. It requires a dynamic, ongoing alignment. A belief must track the world as it changes, not just reflect it at a single point in time. This theory challenges us to think differently about knowledge. It suggests that truth is not static, not something we simply discover and hold on to forever. Truth is a relationship, a continuous alignment between what we believe and the ever-changing world around us. Imagine how this changes how we view knowledge. If truth is about tracking reality, then we must constantly adjust our beliefs, keeping them aligned with what is real. This doesn't mean we can never be certain. It means that our certainty must always be open to the possibility of change. The beauty of Nozick's theory is in its simplicity. It doesn't require us to define truth in complex ways. Instead, it says that truth is just a process, an ongoing dance between our beliefs and the world. As long as our beliefs track reality, we are in touch with the truth. However, this theory also reminds us of the limits of our understanding. As we encounter new experiences and new information, our beliefs will need to adjust. If they don't, we may find ourselves disconnected from reality, holding on to something that no longer fits the world we live in. Nozick's tracking theory offers us a way to think about truth that is both accessible and flexible. It allows us to see truth not as something fixed, but as something that moves with the world, requiring us to be constantly aware and adaptable in our pursuit of it. You walk into a room and see a chair. You know it's a chair because you've seen many chairs before. But what makes this particular chair a chair? Is it the way it looks, the way it feels when you sit in it, or something deeper that defines its true essence? This is the heart of the paradox of analysis, a question about how we understand the things we already know. It challenges the idea that we can define something by breaking it down into simpler terms. What happens when we try to explain something, only to find that our explanation is almost identical to the thing we're trying to explain? Take the word bachelor. We know it refers to an unmarried man. But if we say, a bachelor is an unmarried man, are we really explaining what a bachelor is, or are we just restating it? The paradox of analysis says that sometimes our definitions simply repeat what we already know, without offering any new insight. When we try to analyze something, we often believe that breaking it down into smaller pieces will help us understand it better. But what if that analysis doesn't really give us any new understanding? What if the explanation is just another way of saying the same thing, without deepening our knowledge? The paradox of analysis arises when we realize that many definitions do just that. They repeat what's already inherent in the concept. We say that a bachelor is an unmarried man, but we already knew that our definition doesn't add anything new. It simply restates the idea we started with. This leads to an interesting dilemma. If analysis doesn't truly uncover new truths, what's the point of trying to define things more precisely? Are we merely playing with words, or is there a deeper value in how we approach the world through these definitions and analysis? Think about a familiar object, like a table. You might define it as a flat surface supported by legs, but this definition doesn't really help you see the table in a new way. It simply breaks down the idea of a table into its parts. Does this analysis deepen our understanding, or simply repeat what we already knew? The paradox of analysis asks whether definitions can ever truly uncover something new about the world. If every definition is just a way of restating what we already know, can we ever truly understand something more deeply by analyzing it? Or are we simply reinforcing ideas we've already accepted? In many cases, definitions seem to circle back to the same point. We can define a circle as a shape with no corners, and every point equidistant from the center. But this doesn't reveal anything more about the nature of a circle. It's a restatement of the basic concept, not a deeper insight into what it is. The paradox also challenges how we understand concepts like knowledge and truth. If we define truth as something that corresponds to reality, aren't we just repeating the same idea? How can we define things like truth, knowledge, or justice without falling into the trap of circular reasoning, where our explanations simply restate what we already believe? This leads us to wonder whether deeper understanding comes from analysis at all. Can we really define concepts like love or beauty, or are our attempts at definition just mirrors of what we already feel? When we break down these ideas into smaller parts, are we deepening our understanding, or just putting them into different words? One of the key points of the paradox of analysis is that sometimes, the more we try to define something, the less we seem to understand it. Our definitions may appear precise, but they might not add any meaningful knowledge. Instead, they may simply reflect our existing assumptions about the concept. This paradox doesn't mean that analysis is useless, but it does suggest that we need to be careful about what we expect from it. While definitions can help clarify our thoughts, they may not always lead to deeper understanding. Sometimes, trying to define something can make it harder to see its true nature. Consider how we try to explain our feelings. If someone asks why you love something, you might try to define your love with words, but do words truly capture the depth of your feelings? Or are you just describing love with more words that don't really reveal anything new about what love actually is? The paradox of analysis invites us to question the limits of language and reasoning. If definitions merely repeat what we already know, can we ever fully capture the truth of complex concepts? Can words and explanations ever truly do justice to the experiences, emotions, and realities they are meant to describe? This is a reminder that language, while powerful, can be limiting. Our attempts to define things can sometimes prevent us from truly understanding them. The more we try to break things down into smaller pieces, the more we might lose sight of their deeper, unspoken essence. The paradox of analysis also suggests that some truths cannot be fully captured in words. Perhaps the truest aspects of the world are those that resist definition. Our attempts to analyze, to break things into neat definitions, may only skim the surface of a deeper, more complex reality that defies easy explanation. Ultimately, this paradox challenges us to think carefully about how we define and understand the world. It reminds us that definitions can help, but they are not always the key to deeper understanding. Sometimes, the true nature of things lies beyond the words we use to describe them. You open a book, the pages inviting you into a world of imagination. In this world, dragons soar across the sky, and heroes embark on grand adventures. The story is rich with detail, yet none of it is real. Still, you feel the weight of truth in the tale, even though it's all made up. This is the heart of the truth in fiction paradox. It raises a curious question: can something fictional, something that isn't real in the physical world, still hold truth? When a story unfolds, and we find ourselves moved by its characters, its conflicts, and its resolutions, does it reflect something true, even if it's all invented? Think about a fairy tale, where a princess is trapped in a tower, waiting to be rescued. The story may not be real, but we still find meaning in it. We see the struggle, the hope, and the triumph. In a way, it feels true, not because it happened, but because it reveals something about the human experience. The paradox lies in the fact that these stories, though fictional, can carry truths about our emotions, our desires, and the way we see the world. The story of the princess may not be a factual account, but it still says something about hope, struggle, and rescue that we recognize in our own lives. So, what makes this a paradox? If truth is supposed to correspond to reality, how can something fictional be true? The truth in fiction paradox challenges our understanding of truth by suggesting that truth doesn't always have to be about facts or events that actually happened. It can also be about meaning and insight. Consider a poem. The words may not describe an actual event, but they can still resonate with truths about life, love, or loss. The poem may be entirely imaginary, yet it reflects real emotions and experiences. In this sense, the poem speaks a truth about the human condition, even if it's not true in the literal sense. This paradox forces us to reconsider what truth is. If fictional stories can reveal truths, then truth might not just be about objective facts. It might also be about the deeper meanings we find in stories, ideas, and experiences, even when those experiences are created by our imaginations. The truth in fiction paradox shows us that truth can take many forms. It can be found not only in the world of facts, but also in the world of imagination. The stories we tell, the myths we create, the art we make, they all hold truths that go beyond the literal and speak to something deeper inside of us. Think about a movie you love. The characters, the setting, the plot, none of it is real. Yet when the movie ends, you may find yourself thinking about it for days. Why? Because the emotions, the ideas, and the connections it made with you were real. The truth in the movie lies in the way it touched you. This is where the paradox deepens. We often think of truth as something that exists independently of us, something we discover through facts and evidence. But the truth in fiction paradox suggests that truth can also be something we create, together through stories, emotions, and shared experiences. Fiction becomes a mirror, reflecting the truth of human nature. It's also worth noting that fiction can teach us important lessons. Consider a novel about a person who learns the value of kindness. While the events may not have occurred, the lessons they impart are real. The character's journey reflects truths about empathy and growth, things that can apply to our own lives, even though the story is made up. But how do we reconcile this with our everyday understanding of truth? We might say that fiction reveals a deeper kind of truth, one that exists not in the world of facts, but in the world of meaning. The paradox forces us to expand our concept of truth beyond what can be verified in the world, into the realm of experiences and emotional insights. This isn't to say that all fiction is equally truthful. Some stories may carry more meaning, more relevance, or more emotional resonance than others. But the paradox lies in the fact that even a made-up story can hold truths about the world, about people, or about life itself, regardless of whether it's factually true. The truth in fiction paradox isn't just about art or stories, it applies to how we live our lives. We create narratives about ourselves, our experiences, and our dreams. These narratives may not always be entirely factual, but they still reflect truths about who we are and how we understand the world. In this way, the paradox asks us to think more deeply about what truth really is. Is it only about what we can observe, or is it also about the meanings we find in the things we imagine, the stories we tell, and the experiences we share? Truth, it seems, can come in many forms, even from fiction. This leads to another question. If fiction can reveal truths, can lies do the same? Can a story that isn't entirely truthful still hold meaning, even if it's not factual? The paradox encourages us to consider that truth isn't just about facts, it's about the deeper lessons and meanings that arise from the stories we tell. In this sense, the truth in fiction paradox helps us see the world in a more open way. It invites us to embrace the idea that truth is not just something rigid and unchanging. Sometimes, truth can come from the most unexpected places, from the stories we create, the ideas we explore, and the imaginations we share. Ultimately, this paradox invites us to think of truth as a living, breathing concept, one that evolves with us and through us. Fiction may not reflect the world as it is, but it can reflect the truths of our inner worlds, our emotions, and our deepest thoughts. Through stories, we explore the truth of what it means to be human. You're sitting in a room full of people, each person with their own opinion about the world. One person says, "Truth is different for everyone. What's true for me may not be true for you." It feels comfortable, doesn't it? Everyone gets to have their own truth. But then, something begins to feel off. This is where the challenge of relativism and self-refutation begins. Relativism suggests that truth is not universal, it's personal, shaped by individual perspectives. What's true for one person might not be true for another. It sounds simple, yet the more we think about it, the more questions it raises. If truth is relative, then everything is subjective. What you believe is true for you, and what I believe is true for me. But here's the catch. When we say truth is relative, aren't we making a statement about truth that is supposed to apply to everyone? If truth is relative, then is the statement truth is relative also relative? This is the problem of self-refutation. The idea that truth is relative contradicts itself. If we claim that all truths are subjective, then the very claim that truth is relative must also be subjective. In this sense, relativism undermines its own argument, making the idea of truth being relative difficult to hold on to. Imagine someone says, "There are no absolute truths." That sounds clear, but the very statement they're making is itself an absolute claim. By saying there are no absolute truths, they are asserting an absolute truth, that no truths are absolute. It's a contradiction built right into the idea. If everything is subjective, then even the idea that truth is relative becomes just another personal belief. It means we can't rely on the concept of relative truth to explain how we understand the world because it doesn't hold up under scrutiny. It collapses in on itself, like a structure that has no foundation. This paradox makes us think more deeply about the nature of truth. Can truth really be relative, or is there something universal that we all share? The idea that truth could be flexible for each person sounds liberating, but it also raises the question of how we communicate and relate to each other if we can never agree on what is true. Relativism might feel comforting, like it allows space for different perspectives. But if every perspective is equally valid, how do we solve disagreements or understand one another? If all truths are valid, then how do we even argue for anything? Our ability to understand the world seems to depend on a common ground that relativism denies. Take the concept of a law. If laws are based on truth, and truth is relative, then are laws only valid for those who believe in them? If everyone has their own truth, does that mean that no law can be objectively right or wrong? The world of relativism becomes one where no fixed point of reference exists. This leaves us with a deep question: what do we base our understanding on, if truth is not something we can all agree on? Without some common sense of truth, how can we make decisions, communicate, or understand each other's experiences? Relativism seems to suggest that understanding is impossible. At the heart of this paradox is the idea that truth, in order to be useful and meaningful, must have some universal quality. If it's always shifting, always personal, it becomes impossible to communicate about what is real, what is just, or even what we mean when we say something is true. Relativism leads us down a path where every belief is equally valid, yet no one can be certain of anything. If we cannot agree on any common ground, if every truth is just a personal interpretation, then we risk losing the very thing that makes communication and understanding possible: shared reality. In contrast, when we accept that there are objective truths, we can begin to build common understanding. We agree on facts, on what is real, and from that shared foundation, we can have meaningful conversations, debates, and learning. Without this foundation, relativism doesn't open the doors to freedom of thought, it closes them. Consider how we deal with a math problem. When we do simple arithmetic, we don't say, "The answer is true for me, but maybe not for you." The answer is fixed, it's the same for everyone. This shared certainty is what allows us to communicate about numbers, science, and facts. Without this, communication breaks down. Relativism, then, presents an interesting challenge. On one hand, it allows for diversity of thought and personal experiences, but on the other, it undermines the very possibility of a shared, stable reality. If there is no common truth, how do we even know what we're talking about when we communicate? What the paradox reveals is that for us to understand the world and each other, there must be some truths that everyone can agree on. Truth isn't just a personal belief or a subjective opinion. It's something that connects us all, that provides a framework for meaning and understanding. Without it, we risk losing the ability to communicate. Relativism's self-refutation forces us to confront the tension between personal belief and shared reality. While it encourages open-mindedness, it also challenges the very foundation of communication and understanding. For truth to have meaning, it must be something we can all recognize, not just something that exists in individual minds. In thinking through this paradox, we are left with a deeper appreciation for truth that transcends personal experience. It's not about erasing diverse perspectives, but about finding the points where those perspectives intersect with a common reality that allows us to build bridges of understanding and connection. You walk into a room where people are discussing what's real. Some argue that truth is found in objective facts, things that exist independent of us. Others, however, believe that truth is created through our interactions, shaped by the way we come together and agree on what matters. This is the essence of constructivist epistemology. It suggests that knowledge isn't just something we discover, but something we create together. Truth doesn't exist as a fixed, external entity waiting to be uncovered. Instead, it emerges from the shared experiences, language, and beliefs of people within a community. Imagine a group of friends trying to decide on a movie to watch. They discuss their preferences, agree on one, and the decision is made. The truth, in this case, isn't an objective fact like the color of the sky. It's a social truth, shaped by the group's agreement. This idea challenges traditional views of truth. It asks, if truth isn't just found but made, then how do we know it's real? Constructivists argue that our understanding of truth comes from the ways we interact with each other. What we call true isn't discovered in isolation, it's constructed together. For example, think about cultural norms. What's considered polite in one society might not be in another. Truth about politeness isn't something we can measure or test objectively. It's a social agreement, something created by shared expectations and behavior. The truth of politeness depends on the society you're in. Constructivist epistemology also invites us to think about knowledge as something that grows from our relationships with others. We don't learn in a vacuum. We are constantly interacting with the world and with each other, and those interactions shape the truths we come to hold. This doesn't mean that all truths are equally valid. Some truths are more widely accepted or better supported by evidence, but it does suggest that truth is always filtered through our social contexts. What we know depends on where we are, who we're with, and the shared beliefs of our community. In this view, truth becomes more than a solitary pursuit. It's not just about facts or data points, it's about how we come together, communicate, and build understanding. The way we see the world is shaped by the language we use, the stories we tell, and the agreements we make about what matters. Think about the way scientific knowledge works. While science tries to uncover objective truths, the methods and frameworks it uses are shaped by the collective understanding of the scientific community. What's considered true in science is a result of agreement and consensus, built on the ideas and discoveries of many people over time. This approach challenges the idea that truth is something we can find by simply observing the world. Instead, it suggests that what we know is always influenced by the perspectives, biases, and agreements of the people around us. Truth is not just something out there waiting to be discovered, it's something we construct together. It also raises important questions about power. Who decides what is true? When groups or societies come together, they don't always agree on what matters. The truth can become shaped by those with the power to influence the conversation. This brings up concerns about whose voices are heard and whose truths are validated. For example, consider the way history is written. Different groups may have different perspectives on the same events, and the truths they share may vary. What we accept as historical truth is often the result of who had the power to tell their story. In this sense, truth is not just a reflection of reality, but of social power. This doesn't mean that everything is equally true, but it does remind us that our understanding of truth is shaped by the communities we belong to. Truth is always socially situated. What we consider to be true is influenced by our culture, our language, and the ways in which we communicate and understand the world. Constructivism doesn't deny that there are facts about the world. It just challenges the idea that we can access these facts purely and independently. Instead, it suggests that we are always interpreting, negotiating, and co-creating what we know with others. Truth in this sense is a shared and dynamic process. This idea also encourages us to think more flexibly about truth. If truth is something that is constructed, then it's not rigid or unchanging. It evolves with us, adapting to the times, the conversations, and the contexts in which we live. What's true today might not have been true yesterday, and it may not be true tomorrow. Consider how social movements challenge the established truths of their time. When groups of people come together and push for change, they often challenge the social truths that once seemed unquestionable. What we know then is always in flux, shaped by new ideas, new voices, and new perspectives. Ultimately, constructivist epistemology teaches us that truth is not something we passively discover, but something we actively create. It's a reminder that knowledge is a shared process, built on the interactions, agreements, and conversations we have with others. Truth in this view is as much about connection as it is about observation. As we reflect on this, we realize that truth is not fixed in place. It moves with us, shaped by our interactions, our cultures, and our conversations. What is true today might change tomorrow, not because the world changes, but because the way we understand and interpret it evolves along with us.